Good evening and welcome to the first Business Support Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting in this election circle. Today, as the first opposition chairman of this overarching Overview and Scrutiny Committee, entrusted with the responsibility to provide guidance and leadership on the development and coordination of scrutiny functions for all Overview and Scrutiny Committee in Medway Council. It is a privilege and an honor to collectively embark on a journey to foster prosperity and ensure the best possible outcome for our residents. First and foremost, I wish to express my deepest gratitude to the administration and members of the council for entrusting me with this crucial role. I'm acutely aware of the significance it holds. It is a role that demands diligence, objectivity, and unwavering commitment to serving the best interest of our constituents. I would also like to extend my appreciation to council officers who work tirelessly behind the scene. Their dedication to the betterment of Medway is truly commendable. Your expertise and knowledge will be invaluable as we navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. I look forward to collaborating with each of you and fostering an environment open to dialogue and constructive engagement. To members of the public who are present, the leaders and opposition leaders, and I'm sure that I know the previous chairman is watching live. Thank you. Your presence is a testament to the importance of public involvement and democratic accountability. Your trust and support inspire me to strive for excellence in my role as the first opposition chairman, ensuring that your voices are heard, your concerns addressed, and your aspirations realized. As we commence our work, let us also be mindful of the challenges that lie ahead: economic uncertainties, technological disruptions, and environmental concerns are but a few of the complex issues we must address in our scrutiny role. We must strive for a balance that fosters sustainability, economic growth, while nurturing a sense of responsibility towards our environment and the well-being of our citizens. I firmly believe that regardless of the political affiliation, we share a common goal to uplift the life of our constituents and build a thriving, inclusive, and resilient community. So let's set aside partisan differences. Let's focus instead on merits of our ideas and the collective wisdom we possess. Through robust debate, diligent scrutiny, and the power of collaboration, we can deliver policies and initiatives that will propel Medway to new heights of prosperity. In conclusion, I pledge my unwavering commitment to this committee and the crucial mandate. I promise to serve as a voice of constructive opposition, challenging and holding the council accountable while working hand in hand with all stakeholders to achieve our shared objectives. Together, let us forge a path towards a vibrant and prosperous Medway. Thank you, and may our journey ahead be one of a fruitful collaboration and meaningful progress. Apologies for absence.
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Amina Shan.
Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 2, record of meeting. Can I...
Do I say I'm substituting for Andrew Lawrence?
Thank you. Yes, I welcome Councillor Barrett, who's substituting for Andrew Lawrence, and Councillor Campbell, who is substituting for Councillor Animation. Welcome. Thank you. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 30th of March and the record of the joint meeting of committees held on the 24th of May as correct? Councillor MacDonald.
Chair, I was going to say, on this occasion, Councillor Crozier will be very happy. I think he was the only one at that last meeting out of all of us, wasn't he?
They sound okay to me, Chairman.
Thank you. If anyone wishes to raise any factual accuracy issue, please indicate now. No? Okay. We're moving on to urgent matters. I don't have any. That takes us to declaration of disclosable pecuniary interest and any other interests or whipping. Are there any DPR or interests? Councillor Hackwell.
Just to say that in the report it mentions Medway Adult Education, and my wife is a tutor and assessor for Medway Education, but that's it.
Thank you. Okay, that swiftly takes us to agenda item 5, Council Plan Performance Monitoring Report and Strategic Risk Summary. Sam Backfarley, Chief Organisation Culture Officer, will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report does contain performance data that relates to the year of 22-23. So the changes we've spoken about in terms of what is the remit of this committee, there is additional reports, there is additional performance reporting metrics in this one that has not been shaded out for that purpose. So this report summarises the performance of the council plan measures that fall under the remit of this committee for the year of 22-23. These performance measures are for quarter 4, which is January to March 23. There are 7 council plan measures of success which fall under the remit of this committee that finalises our reporting for year 22-23. They are presented at Appendix 1. 5 measures fall under the Growth Council Plan priority and 2 measures fall under the Council values. 71.4%, which is 5 out of the 7 council plan measures, we're reporting on have either met or exceeded targets. The 2 measures that did not achieve were the MAE2, which is the percentage retention rate, and it reports on quarter 2 of the academic year. This measure was significantly below target, which means it's 5% or more below target. It achieved 85% against a target of 94%. And HC4, which is the number of private sector properties improved as a result of the council's intervention. This measure, although slightly below target, so less than 5%, I do need to point out it's achieved 235 against a target of 238. And it is proposed that that will move to an annual measure for next year. Given the overarching responsibility of this committee to provide guidance and leadership on the development and the coordination of the scrutiny function for all other overview and scrutiny committees, the report also contains a performance summary of all services at Appendix 2 for information. A summary of the discussions at the Children and Young People, Regeneration, Culture and Environment and Health and Adult Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee is also included at Appendix 4 for information. This report also presents Quarter 4 22-23 review of the strategic risks at Appendix 3. There were no changes to the strategic risk current scores for this quarter. However, Cabinet at the June 23 meeting agreed to add 2 new risks to the risk register. The first one being the Med Pay Review, which is our ongoing pay review of how we reward our staff and create capacity to move through the band, and transparency for career pathways, and recruitment and retention due to the high turnover and economic factors that are surrounding us whilst we progress with the Med Pay Review. There was also a proposal to remove 1 risk from the strategic risk register, which is the SR49 income reduction due to COVID-19. When the Quarter 3 performance risk report was presented to this committee, the committee requested that areas are not relevant to this committee be shaded out, so the following approach has been taken and will continue for the remainder of this year. So just to recap on the appendices that you have, Appendix 1, this is the appendix that covers performance relevant to this committee for the year of 22-23. Appendix 2 and 4, these are appendices due to the overarching responsibility of the committee, and the content is therefore for information. And Appendix 3 is all the risks that are relevant to this committee. Those that are not have been shaded out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any member? Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, and you may not be able to answer this tonight, Sam. It's on Medway adult education. I see that we're running the 50 plus programme and we're doing maths and English, and with the objective of getting people back into work. Do we actually measure how many people that attended those courses end up being employed after they've been successfully, and therefore get a measure of how successful Medway adult education are being?
So my understanding is, in terms of safeguarding jobs, around making sure that what we're putting in place for people to be educated in and to move into jobs is a measure that we do have. It came up at the last RCE committee. A point was taken away just to find out how we do that and how we measure that. So the briefing note we're going to provide to RCE committee, we could provide here as well.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I wanted particularly to focus on Appendix 2, and I realise that officers won't necessarily be able to answer all these questions now. I'm going to ask for some information to be sent to me, if that's agreeable. But in the spirit, Chair, that you started off the meeting, can I comment positively on the work that's being done on climate change and ULEV, and also the work that's being done on the priority play areas? We recently had a play area refurbished in the wall which I represent at Laburnum Recreation Ground, and I noted the health overview and health and social care overview and scrutiny committee comments that the budget was the minimum needed to refurbish play areas, and I wanted to emphasise the importance of these play areas in areas of social deprivation. So some positive comments to start off with, Chair, in the spirit in which you opened the meeting. I did want to go on to ask one or two questions. I noticed that there was comment. It's difficult for me to actually refer to the exact slide because the pages aren't numbered, but if one looks at the slides that begin on place, about 8 slides down, there's a reference to friends groups and the work that is done on, for example, Reed Common and places like that. And I was at an event recently, a members' tour, which was laid on by the current chief executive, tour of development sites, and he commented, the amount of resource that friends groups provide is equivalent to so many full-time posts. And I thought this was interesting because of the resource that these friends groups were putting in. It's equivalent to a number of full-time posts. I wanted to ask, it refers, staying with Reed Common, it refers to a management plan. I wanted to ask if officers could arrange for the management plan to be sent to me, because I'd be interested to know what it includes. The Friends of Reed Common have asked me some questions about their site and improving the site and the security. I also noticed, and this may not appear to be directly relevant to what I've just been talking about, but I noticed on the last slide down under Appendix 2 place, there was a reference to dogs on leads, dog fouling and enforcement. It did strike me that the numbers there were extremely low. So it would be useful, perhaps by an officer contacting me, if I could find out a little bit more, unless somebody here knows the answer, find out a little bit more as to the reasons why our enforcement process on things like dogs on leads, not being on leads, is so very low. I suspect it's rather like the police often argue that dog wardens can't be everywhere. But I'd be interested if that information could be forwarded on. As I say, assuming it's not available now. So getting to my last questions, Chair, I particularly wanted to focus on the sort of people and health aspects of the of Appendix 2. I noted the red areas as regards vulnerable adults with learning difficulties. I don't particularly want to comment on that now, but I noted it in light of the talk that members had before the meeting, the training session that members had before the meeting about digital inclusion or digital exclusion. And I think perhaps that needs to be flagged up at some point. My specific question now was about the red areas in children's services, about things like school attendance. I'm asking this question now because Ofsted is about to arrive, and I wondered if somebody could tell me how Ofsted ready we are in terms of the performance data that we've got, whether there have been any developments since we had the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to be assured that where we are is a transparent place in terms of being able to explain our situation to Ofsted. Thank you, Chair, for bearing with me while I ask those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Sam, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Jones. As predicted, there is some stuff that I wouldn't be able to answer today. So noted around most definitely the management plan, dogs on leads, and why the enforcement is so low. We did have some discussion at the RC ONS, but that was more around dogs failing and being caught in the act as opposed to the leads. So I wasn't privy to a debate around that, but we can pick that up as well as the vulnerable adults. In terms of our readiness for Ofsted, I mean, that has been the talk of what everybody across the whole council has been supporting and doing. Yes, we have some performance measures. One that is largely debated is the ILAC 7, which is the audits, the inadequate audits. And we've had a trend whereby that has got better over the period. So an 80% good audit outcome would be for a good local authority. We're not starting in that position. So the service would always, share with us that concern that 80 is there as an aspiration and it shouldn't be less than that, and that's what we must strive to achieve. But given the position we're starting in, it is about the journey of improvement we have as opposed to hitting that particular target. Within the information that's in the council plan, that is only a very small snapshot of the stuff that we're doing across children's services, and there is a whole improvement plan that sits behind this, and we work with a number of partners, and we are accountable to members through improvement boards. So I do believe the service is in a good position to demonstrate the improvement that it's made over the period of the journey. We have evidence to show the improvement we've made, but as with any inspection, it really does depend what is asked, what is looked at, and with any area there will always be pockets that we can do better at. So I wouldn't like to predict the outcome of any investigation, but I think we're in a stronger position than we was when we got our inadequate judgment. It was debated at the previous ONS. There's slight reference to it within the notes that came forward, but most definitely we could provide a greater response outside of committee tonight rather than my assumption of perhaps where we are.
Helpful anyway, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Samantha, can I just ask a couple of, I'm going to say simple questions. They're probably not going to be that simple, but I'm going to try. Around the targets, when I look at the targets, a lot of those reds are historical. They're coming up every time, so I'm not going to dig down into each one, but, some of them I'm seeing every single time. For example, on health, I'm seeing the smoking cessation always in red. I'm seeing the payments, direct payments always in red. And my question was around the setting the targets. You're doing a council plan refresh, obviously with the cabinet and etc. Would you look at those, apart from statutory targets, will you be looking at the reduction maybe or the rejigging? I'm not going to say so we get greens before everyone goes mad at me. I'm just saying realistic targets that are achievable, because every time you have a set of targets and 3 are red every single day, if you're a directorate and you're just looking at that and you can't do nothing about it, you'll be in despair, wouldn't you? So I'm going to go back to the smoking cessation. I chair the health committee. So on that committee, I asked the question of the fantastic public health team. I said about why is that red the target? And the answer I got back, which I know James would be very happy to say, was because they want to set the target really high, but they can't achieve, they know they're not going to achieve that target. So if they know they're never going to achieve it, it's not about maybe the cabinet and about all of you saying maybe you should lower the expectation, but if you don't and you're looking at that as an aspiration, it's no good looking at an aspiration if it's red, because you're never going to, the same as direct payments, never going to change. So could you just give me a little bit, I know we had the training before, but could you just give me a little bit around how you may look at that, especially in the new council plan refresh? Is that okay? Obviously, I won't take out the statutory parts that you have to set at a certain target.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, a great question, and one that's probably bore lots of frustration over the period of the year, both for officers and members in that regard. I think most definitely with some of them around the aspiration, there is an expectation that we will be as good as we can be. So publicly to publicise where we want to get to is a good thing. The difficulty we have is we don't necessarily have the milestones in which prove we're moving towards it. And what's tending to happen this year is the narrative seems to be repetitive, or it just seems to get very lengthy, very long, and it's starting to become a bit of a justification rather than a proactive way of moving forward. So some of the stuff we've been doing in the background ahead of the new council plan measure, whatever they may land to be, we don't know yet. But some of the work we've been doing is working across children and adults and public health with the business analysts, and we're looking at a new framework which is called the logical framework. We've got a session on Monday which is being run by public health and their business analysts, which is really breaking down the aspiration versus the reality and giving us a new approach to how we're going to look at. Oh, sorry, lost my mic there. Now, we will take that on to corporate management team. So this is kind of like a first attempt, really, to try something different in terms of how we record performance. And that will feature into the work that we're going to do across Cabinet and CMT moving forward around what those priorities might be. So it's absolutely recognised. It is a frustration. And like I say, for officers, it's become quite a defensive position because we're not there, not getting it. And like you said, it's demotivating. I think some of these are driven by pressure. So I mentioned the ILAC 7, 80% wanting to get there. If we wasn't pushing and publicising for that, and we've got Ofsted coming in to review us, why not? Why are you not striving to get there? And I think it's about something about being honest about the tenor of how quickly we can make that target. So being honest, ambitious and open, but chunking that down into 12 months deliverables in terms of where we expect to be and having a narrative to support that year. So quite a bit of work to do, quite a bit of culture to change around how we've been doing it for a very long time, but one that is definitely here as an opportunity to do immediately.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back just a quick one? So the new council plan refresh, you're saying you're going to do things a bit different, so we could be looking forward to seeing maybe a bit of a different dashboard in some respects?
Might be running out. Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be pushing to measure performance better so that, you know, it's more informative, it's more realistic, and actually you can see the journey that it's making towards the aspiration as opposed to that high target that we're just filling in a defensive narrative to. So yes, it will change. How far we get in that? We've got a few months of challenge ahead, but one that we're up for.
Thank you. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at some of the figures to do with social care positions, and looking at a number on this report saying that nearly 1 in 3 positions weren't filled by a permanent social worker, and the average caseload is about 30% above where it should be. So a bit of a double whammy there, that they've got too much work on. We've potentially put in a lot of stress and undue care on them. And also that falls into potentially the Ofsted. These figures are pretty similar to when I left the council 4 years ago, and doesn't seem to have got any better. So has anything happened to get us in a position where the most vulnerable children in our society are actually getting the support they need?
Sam?
I guess I couldn't comment in particular about the most vulnerable children getting the service they need. I would need the service to give you confidence that that is happening. I can, however, comment around some of the national challenges we've had in terms of recruiting social workers and retaining social workers. We do have significant issues within social care. We are hiring people at an alarming rate, but equally we are losing people because of the stress within the system and the difficulty within the role. Now, some people are choosing to leave through lifestyle choices, where actually they've been working in quite a stressful environment for a long period of time. And I think one thing that has proven since the pandemic is that the labour market is very unpredictable in terms of personal choice now, and it's very difficult to be working in particular areas of national concern. And it is noted that social workers nationally is a major issue in terms of those that are leaving the profession and very few coming into it. What we have done, we've been quite creative. We've had to embark on the use of project teams because even the local market has slowed down. But that's a bit of a double-edged sword because the more we put project teams in, they're more lucrative and therefore then there's not enough locums because they're moving into project teams. So we're in a bit of a fix actually to make sure that we don't have uncovered posts, and that is the major risk. So if we've got caseloads that can't be allocated or children that can't be looked after, that is our significant risk. So we're exhausting every mechanism possible to us to make sure that we're not in a position where we don't have uncovered posts. And I think that has probably been our challenge for the last 6 months. In terms of what that might look like as somebody coming in and viewing what we've been up to, we've had the DFE advisor working alongside us as part of the improvement journey. And they absolutely support everything we've done, every move we've made in terms of the national context and us doing everything we can to tackle this issue. So I feel very confident that as an organisation, as a service and as a HR team, we have used every mechanism possible to us to make sure that we're attractive within the market. And there is a whole host of things, and we've done a paper for the Children and Young People's ONS, which we could share with this committee for background. And that did look at all of the recruitment channels, making sure that we were competitive in the market around salary, making sure that we had additional things in like retention payments, but also looking at the well-being concern of people that are in the service once they're here. So rather than wait for somebody to become stressed and go off with sickness, what can we do in advance of that and proactively engage with people around well-being? And we've put a lot of focus on the well-being side of the people that are within the council working with us on those day-to-day stresses. So a lot of work has gone into it, but in the national context, it is still very, very difficult.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to come back, but I've got a few more questions on the following pages. In HR3, we mentioned that we're now using HRA properties as temporary accommodation. Do we know how many, the waiting list for HRA properties is very, very long in Medway. So do we know how many properties we're actually using for temporary accommodation and how that's affecting the allocation of housing to deserving families? We mentioned the casework for the social workers. I remember a couple of years ago that we had a recruitment drive, I believe, from South Africa, and we employed about 10 social workers from South Africa. How successful with that? How many are left? And are we looking at that sort of programme again? The Councillor Jones mentioned the £250,000, which was said by the officers in the RCE was the bare minimum that we needed to keep our playgrounds up to scratch and running. Can we confirm how much is in this year's capital budget to keep the playgrounds up and running? Is it at least 250,000? And that's all.
Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hackwell. In terms of the HR3 and the pressure within the system, that one I would have to take away and come back to you on. I wouldn't like to guess there, and I don't know the detail. In terms of the international recruitment, we've done a couple of these in the time here. The last one, was it a success? I think We still have a couple of people with us, but not everybody. In terms of some of the difficulty that people found when they were placed with us was very much around the support that was available to them and the community and the culture in which they needed to be, and being so far away from family and friends, particularly with the pandemic hitting and no travelling allowed, really did hinder our efforts around that. We've been in a situation where we've worked across our partnership board, so we've been working with St John Fisher, for example, because they've had to do some international recruitment. And where we've landed in is because of the risk that we had around the distance and the cultural challenges and the language barriers that we had before, we are looking at doing something a little bit closer to home across Europe. Where we've brought in project teams at the moment and we have uncovered posts, we just don't have this strength within the system to make sure we look after people properly enough when they land. So it's in our future-proof plan. It is there as a consideration. There are some few things we've still got to work through, like visas to work, and we look at accommodation. And we're looking at other business areas that have networks that we can tap into, so communities are already established, so when people come, they feel supported. And that seemed to be the biggest barrier, actually, that people felt quite isolated and quite lonely. So we're trying to see what's around us first before we make a decision as to where we go, but it's absolutely in our plan of thinking. And then Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I can take this play area investment question, assuming my mic stays alive, so sorry. So back in 2020, the Cabinet recommended to Council that 250,000 would be added to every year's capital programme, subject to the availability of Section 106 or capital receipts. So through that programme, we added 275,000, it was in the first year, 21-22, 250,000 went in for 22-23, and they were all funded from capital receipts. When we built the budget for 23-24, we weren't projecting the availability of enough capital receipts to fund anything beyond the commitments in the existing capital programme at that point. And so there is no scheme in the capital programme at this point, but what we've said as officers, or what the council report said, I think, was that as and when Section 106 or other developer contributions become available for a suitable site, we'll add a scheme to the capital programme to deliver play area works, I think.
The issue with that is, of course, that where sites are at maximum development, there's not going to be any Section 106. So therefore, you know, if you can't have development in an area, you'll never refurbish the play areas.
I mean, I can't argue with you, but what I can say is that we're obviously about to begin the process to develop a budget for 24-25 and beyond, and alongside that set out this administration, this council's aspirations to spend capital money, and obviously alongside that we're looking at what availability of capital receipts we might have moving forward. So I think that might be a feature of the budget build for 24-25. Like I say, for 23-24 we're only going to be in a position to add a scheme if funding becomes available, and so at the time of writing the budget report, because we didn't think we had any capital receipts available, we're just waiting for Section 106. Obviously since then we've got a new administration, and you know, we might see reports come forward that make some different suggestions, but all I know about is the budget build process for 24-25, so I'm not aware of any availability of funding for that at the moment.
Thank you, Katie. We then go to Councillor Printer.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about the outcome for preventing homelessness on Appendix 1. It's good to see that 2 of the 3 areas are in green, and I was really looking at the amber one, which was talking about private sector properties that have been improved with council intervention. And it was, forgive me if this is something everyone knows, but what form of council intervention does that take? Is that at an expense to the council, or do they pay for it? And if it is an expense to the council, what's the cost? Thank you.
Yes, good.
I can probably begin an answer, but I'll very quickly stray out of the facts that I know. But I'm aware that there are some instances where Cabinet and Council have agreed recommendations to, for instance, do a compulsory purchase to take a dangerous property off of that was in a state of disrepair, and to finance the works to repair that property, and that the cost would be a charge against that property. So when a sale went through, we would recover our costs in that way. And so they're the only schemes that I'm aware of, but there might be other work going on that's within the budgets, but they're the ones that I know of, and that they come therefore as no cost to the council on the proviso that the property's sold, and that's how we recover our costs.
Thanks.
Thank you. got Councillor Campbell.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions that kind of go back and forth because I've just been reading various pages. So is that okay if I ask all of them at once and then you can kind of come back to me on those? So I have a similar question about temporary accommodation that's provided to people. So because of some casework that's come up in my ward, and I've been speaking to other colleagues, and this is happening across wards. So people who are housed in temporary accommodation by the council, but the actual property and its maintenance is, I understand, outsourced to other providers. Is there some kind of measure to assess whether those properties are maintained properly, whether they're suitable? The reason I'm asking is I can see the numbers of people housed in these accommodation and how that compares. But what about the performance of those providers in terms of providing suitable accommodation that doesn't have hazards for them? So in the specific example I'm thinking of is that I've had a constituent contact us in extreme distress because, quite frankly, the house she's been placed in is not habitable. And then we're all running around in circles now, multiple council officers, and me and my ward colleague trying to figure out a solution to that, including kind of social care for them because of the situation that's being caused. So that's my first question. Right, I think people have already asked a bunch of my other questions. There was an interesting section about people that were moved from direct payments to commissioned services. So maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but my understanding is direct payments are paid to people so that they have a level of flexibility and adaptability in the kind of support that they put so they can stay at home and have the support that they need to live a decent quality of life, so they can buy in the services that they need. Why are we moving people from that to commission services, which might not meet the same level of need? It explains that that's to recoup the 20% VAT on it, but then that's obviously caused pressure on the system because you've then got a backlog of people coming through the referral system and you're having to hire staff now to cover that. So that saving, was that well thought out? Why wasn't it anticipated that it would lead to a jam of the system in terms of how the referrals come through? And do you know what I'm saying? I'm talking about the cost-benefit analysis of making savings like that. Perhaps that's a very granular question and not exactly in the remit of what you can answer, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. And I have a final question about the social isolation program. So it sounds really interesting, and in my work in the charity sector, I've been part of networks like that, social isolation network, and it's so important to, it's really valuable work, and it's great to see that kind of collaboration with the voluntary sector. Again, how much support are we, it feels like a lot of statutory responsibility to me is being outsourced to the voluntary sector. Because there are gaps, so that's now being supplied by the voluntary sector. Can that be a bit patchy? Do they have the same level of training and support? What support do we provide them? And also, I'm worried about digital exclusion. So some of the methods, some of the strategies being put in place for those social isolation alleviance measures, like I think there's a pledge scheme and there's a website. Do we have digital exclusion at the heart of that? Because a lot of socially isolated people will not have access to digital sources. So those are my questions.
Thank you. Who's going to pick up? Sam? Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As expected, there's not going to be many answers from us tonight. These are quite service-specific questions. Typically, housing would be represented at this meeting, but that wasn't possible this evening. And with that moving into RCE, I suggest that might be a question we might want to defer to RCE ONS around the contract management of places where we outsource things like the repairs. So there will be contract management in place, there will be escalation routes in place, and there will be handling in place. But they would need to provide a bit of a brief on that, really. So I would suggest either a brief or referral into ONS to get the answers for that one.
Thank you. I think My question was around the impact on resources that causes. Obviously, there's the frontline service and the vulnerable individuals at the end of it, but this can't be a wise use of resources. There's something there around contract management, effective contract management of these providers, because we are their customers. So we have some clout there, and we should use that to demand better services.
Yeah, and I wouldn't like to say what that looks like, but that there is something in place that absolutely we can share with you, and then there could be more further scrutiny over whether or not that's at the level perhaps it needs to be. I think before I move on to Katie, who was going to, I think, look at the direct payments element, the social isolation programme, in terms of there being gaps in the system and our statutory responsibilities being picked up by voluntary sectors, I don't feel comfortable answering that, if I'm being honest, because I genuinely do not know. And I think that is probably a question that you would need a briefing paper on for the service to explain how we're picking up our statutory responsibility, and where there is then the voluntary element of which we will be supporting whilst training. And, you know, I think the service will be well versed to be able to provide you with that detail. So if that's okay, I'd suggest that we push that one to a briefing note as well. And then that also picks up the digital exclusion. So moving forward, digital is hopefully going to be part of this committee. So all of those kind of questions around the digital enablement across the community and digital exclusion, will have Paul Boyd, who you met earlier, here, and we'll be able to take those questions. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay this evening, but he will be at future meetings. But let's not wait for that future meeting. We'll make sure that that's also tucked into the briefing that you need around the voluntary sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Katie.
Thanks, Chair. So I can only answer a sort of partial part of that question, but the bit about direct payments. So I guess, like some of these questions, if that question came out at a meeting of the HASC, then you'd have the relevant director and assistant director there, who I'm sure would be able to give you a much better answer. But in terms of what actually happened, so direct payments are really commonly used for daycare services. And effectively what happened is a cohort of people had commissioned daycare services with a provider whose VAT status changed. And so in order for them to continue with the existing care that they had in place, it made sense for us to just commission that same care for them on their behalf, instead of them having to source alternative care. So those individuals haven't lost the flexibility. If they wish to change their care, they still could. They could directly commission something else. But that's why that, or whether that had an impact on the sort of, you talked about delays in the service. I'm afraid I don't know, and we'd take that back to officers in, sorry. I'll have to take that back to officers in the service, and perhaps ask them to contact you outside of the committee, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I'm going to bring up something that was a frustration of mine in Regen, and it's frustration here. And hopefully I might get a positive answer when we talk about the refresh around the council plan and maybe reporting. But what's the point in having programme reports to an overview and scrutiny, no matter what it's called, if there are no performance measures in place for the programme? Can we make sure that either we're not wasting time on who said what to whom kind of reports, and that we, going forward, have performance measures for every programme going, that the council spends money, time and resource on, whether it's funded by a grant that council officers had to spend time doing, or whether it is out of our core budgets. So that's my request for somebody who sits on what I would hope is one of the higher scrutiny. Well, they're equally important, all scrutinies, but that going forward we do not have programmes come forward for scrutiny that don't have performance measures, that every programme should have that.
Thank you. Who's going to take that? Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. We can take that away as a point of consideration. You can make a recommendation tonight that you'd like that noted, and of course we will take that away. It is very difficult when we say they're performance measures and yet it says there's no indicators to that performance. I think in the report you've got tonight, climate change might be one of those areas, and that's going to be a remit of this committee. So through the work we're doing, particularly on Monday when we're looking at what the performance measures will be, we'll make sure there's absolutely a plea that nothing is coming forward in regards to programmes that don't have measures that can measure the success of the delivery.
Just for clarity, Can we make that for every ONS, please? Not just this one?
Councillor Brown, yeah, thank you. I'm sure the Vice Chair is taking notes, so we'll take that. Thank you. Councillor Crozer.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the outcome of preventing homelessness and the metric that you've got here for numbers of households living in temporary accommodation. I think it's showing that the long-term trend there is deteriorating, yet the target is 400 and the value is 378. How often do the targets get monitored and changed? Because it would seem that the target is the outcome is below the target, as if we were trying to get to 400, not away from 400, because I would have thought the target should be 0 or 300 or something like that.
Thank you, Councillor Crozer. Sam?
Yeah, so with some of these, they've been quarterly mapped. So it will show as a red because for that particular quarter it might be below target. What we've done in the review in prep for the next council plan and the performance that goes with it is look at those that are better measured annually. So whilst we would give an indication of the direction of travel throughout the year, it would be an overall annual target. And unfortunately, with this particular target, it's shown some red in the last quarter because it was slightly below. Now, I appreciate the 400. I think that was always going to be a stretch. You asked the question, how often are they reviewed? From previous activity across the council plan, once the performance measures agreed at the start of the year, it remains, regardless of what might happen during that year. That target remains, it doesn't necessarily change. It's the narrative that would do the explaining as to why and the mitigation as to why that target might not have been achievable. One of the things we've done in preparation for the next performance measures has made sure that the officers who are responsible for these target measures are working with portfolio holders now to look at whether that target is the right target, should there be another target, and what that looks like. And all of that kind of debate, knowledge and understanding and ideas will feature into the away day where we start to look at what it is we want to achieve and then how we can best measure it. So I think it's fair to say that some of the measures we've got are long overdue for a review, and that's probably been in light of because we've done a light touch refresh for the right reasons of things being in flight. But this does present us with an opportunity to change the measures if that's what we deem necessary.
Can I come back quickly there? It begs the question then, you're showing short-term trends and long-term trends. How long is a long-term trend? Are you talking about 2 quarters or are you talking about a year? And what was the target previously?
Thank you. So in terms of trends, a long-term trend would be for the same quarter the year before, so it's a year in terms of the long term, and short term is a quarter upon quarter. And that's why some of these targets don't work, because they could be driven by seasonal demands, they could be driven by peaks in performance of recruitment and so forth. So that's one of the considerations we've got. In terms of what the target was before, I believe it was less, but I don't know the exact figure, but I could confirm that outside of the committee tonight.
If you wouldn't mind, because it would seem that 400 is quite a high target. I wonder what it was, what it's come down from, and where it's going.
Thank you, Councillor Crozer. She will take over outside the meeting, she said. Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. I also have a bugbear that out of regen, because every time we have a report on the council plan, the bit that really gets to me is the stuff of local politics, and local politics, ground politics, street issues. And we're talking about here is street litter. And it's taken the opposite of Councillor MacDonald. It's that we have set ourselves targets that we always meet. And I'll be looking for something in the new council plan refresh that actually means that there's something that's not easily achievable, it needs to be achieved. So if you look under the clean and green environment and the Medway, a place to be proud of, which is page 68, you see the second measure down there is improved street environmental cleanliness litter. Green. It's always green. But if you walk a few yards down my street or down into the areas which are particularly terraced, it's anything but not littered. It is littered. So I would hope that you can take on board, because every time I read it, regen, so well, it's actually probably you need to tell people to the period of picking and the street or the cleanliness of the street needs to be more often. It's not that. is the fact that it's not recognised. So you can walk around the leafy parts of my ward in Scrutiny, and you won't see hardly any litter. You walk to the terrace streets of my ward, and you'll see litter all the time, especially the new part of my ward, which is down by the town centre. You know, you're almost wading in it, and it's always the same. So, now on the regen, I always get told, well, it's at least the frequency you need to make sure that officers are aware. I've told them that. You know, I've even given them a coloured map of my ward, saying this is where it's going to be. But it's not. I'm not worried about the frequency. What I want to know is the target. The target's got to be more realistic. So, the opposite of Councillor MacDonald is that targets which are always red, maybe they should be slightly different. Targets that always end up being green should easily be a little target. They've got to be something that's understandable, rather than something that's just achieved. The other two greens in the area, I'm quite sure are correct. That is green spaces and refuse collection. But the second one gets a red from me.
Thank you, Councillor Hubbard. Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, all relevant points, and really, thank you for sharing. I think it's very difficult to get it right for everybody. I think that it will be an interesting event when we get Cabinet and Corporate Management team together with a lot of suggestions that we've had, both from members and officers. Where we land, I don't think I can commit to today. It's a little bit above me to confirm exactly how we will end up measuring performance. Monday's session around how we approach the performance measures through the new logical framework will definitely give us a different approach. And hopefully that will be enough to satisfy everybody who's got the frustrations with the current way we're doing it. But we take those comments on board and absolutely will feed them in, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, did you want to come in?
Yeah, a couple of my questions have been answered, but I'll just touch on to direct payments again. It's got 30% target there, value 26. Are we having particular problems with this at all? If people are paid directly for their social care and it's not being used for that sort of thing, are we getting these problems come up at all? And is there any help for these people if it does come up?
Yeah, go on, Sam.
No, it's my finger tonight. No, so I wouldn't be able to answer that to the level of detail you need, but it's something that we can take away just to test to see if there is any difficulty that we're finding, and that has caused some of that shift. So we can get the detail for you.
Thank you. Before I go to the Vice Chair, I've got a couple of questions myself. In Appendix 1, on page 30 of the report, you refer to a range of training courses in English, mathematics, and vocational courses. Now, as AI is expected to have significant impact on various job sectors, including some of the courses that you are taking, in particular counseling, administration, childcare, and education. Now, my question is, what consideration are given to AI when developing these courses to ensure that they are relevant in our rapidly changing environment? That's the first question. The second is, how do you measure growth attained because of the Medway adult educational program? Now, I mean, I've seen in the report, it looks great, but I want to know, how do we measure, how do we know that these programs are value for money to the taxpayer?
Yeah, so again, partial answer, I'm afraid, Chair. In terms of, I guess, the relevance of the courses that we're doing, within the Education and Skills service area, there's a lot of research that goes into understanding what's going on across the economy, and most definitely within the local area. There is a measure within there about safeguarding jobs and making sure people are moving into jobs. That was the one that we said we would feed back to RCE, and the one that I mentioned earlier. So I definitely think that briefing note should be shared with this committee. In terms of people attending the courses and maintaining their attendance at the courses, that's been something that the service has struggled with for a period of time, and they've had to adapt their courses, the times of the courses, to fit in with lifestyle changes and the pressures that people are finding in terms of staying at courses. And I think that attainment rate has come under considerable review over the course of this year, and a number of different ways of running those courses have been put forward. And then in terms of value for money, I'm quite confident there will be a measure there, but I don't know what that is. But again, the service would be able to, through their own service planning, be able to detail how they measure that and what that looks like. And that is something that you'd either want a briefing on, or if you wanted to, you could refer that back to RCE to ask more scrutinies over.
Would like to refer that to RCE. I don't have any other member indicating to speak, so over to you, Vice Chair. We have a recommendation on on page 26 when you're ready, Vice Chair.
I move recommendations on page 26, 7.1, that members have considered question 4, 22-23 performance against the measures used to monitor progress against the Council's priorities, and noted that the strategic risk summary is set out in Appendix 3. Further notes comments on adult education and metrics, Ofsted preparations, realistic target settings, concerns RE social worker recruitment going forward, playground budgets, a briefing paper to come forward on digital and housing, RE Councillor Campbell's concerns, and a performance monitoring targets to actually be set as a recommendation as per Councillor Brown's comments, not only for business support but also for all ONSs. And finally, a briefing service plan value for money, either to go to the RCE or to come as a briefing paper to ONS.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that agreed? Thank you, officers, for taking time to answer these questions. Now we'll move to agenda item 8, which is the revenue and capital budget outturn and annual write-off report for 2022-2023. Katie. Sorry, agenda item 6. Thank you. Thank you.
I was just going to skulk out the door then if you completely skip my item. So thank you very much, Chair. So this report was considered by the Cabinet in June, and it broadly does 3 things. It provides the final position for both the revenue and the capital budgets for 22-23, and it serves as the annual report on irrecoverable debt written off as required by the Council's Constitution. So if I just briefly talk about the revenue budget then. So the outturn for 22-23 is an overspend of just over 6 million. There was a net overspend on children and adult services of just over 18 million, which was offset against some underspends on services for regen, culture and environment of about 3.5 million, business support of 1.7 million, and on the centralised services, which is predominantly the interest and financing budget, which is how we finance the cost of all of our borrowing for the capital programme. The underspend on that was 6.8 million. So the tables in section 4 to 9 set out the detail for each service, and I'm not going to walk you through that tonight. Section 11 explains what this outturn actually means for our general reserves, which is the thing I'd like you to take away from the report, if possible, please, which obviously includes the impact of decisions that were made by the Council during the 22-23 financial year. So in short, we'd budgeted to use almost 5 million of general reserves in setting the budget for 22-23. Funding the year will actually use almost 11 million of our reserves. So we'll close the year with a reserve balance, a general reserve balance, sorry, of just over 10 million. And that's quite considerably down from the 26.5 million that was available at the end of the previous financial year. This, however, does compare quite favourably to the last monitoring report. So that was round 3, which went to Cabinet in February. And at that time, officers were projecting an overspend of 12.3 million, which would have meant that we had to use more than 17 million from general reserves. So, you know, don't say I never bring you good news. The capital outturn for 22-23 is an overspend of just over £1 million, largely as forecast, actually, so in the round 3 budget monitoring. The report sets out, though, how those overspends on now completed schemes will be funded, and principally that's just from additional allocations of grant that we've received, so not by cutting anything else in the programme. The report also asked Cabinet to recommend the addition of a further 15,000 to the Wayfield Primary Scheme, which is, or was still ongoing, I think might be finished now. Finally, section 12 of the report sets out the details of all the irrecoverable debt that had been written off in 22-23, and that's all been written off against the council's provision for bad debt. That totals 3.241 million across all services. And whilst that sounds like a really big number, it actually represents less than 1% of the £357 million worth of debt that was raised in the same period. So obviously happy to attempt to answer any questions on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going through some of the figures, again, I'll focus on looking at the education. From my understanding on education, that comes in from central government and then literally just goes straight back out onto the requirements under that budget. Bit concerning is that the special educational needs, it's 3.7 million overspend on that, and yes, being a school governor, I've noticed the increase in children require additional funding on that, and the impact. And then also seeing the special education needs and disability transport. Just wondering, with nearly 2 million over budget on that, what the causes for that. And then looking down with the dedicated schools grant, seeing that we're putting it into reserves, which is currently sitting at 21.4 million. Where's that money? So that's basically money that's been spent. How do we, will we be getting that back from central government? And if we are, when? Because it seems to keep going up every single year. And then also looking at the other one that stood out to me was legal and governance, legal land charges and licensing, an overspend of 95%. Just could we have a bit more detail on that one, please?
Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so education funding. So you're quite right in that the majority of the grant funding we receive, we passport directly to schools, but we do have some responsibilities that we have to directly deliver around educational psychologists and the cost of actually delivering a SEND service, so the team that deals with the educational health and care plans, that kind of stuff. And there's another responsibility, there's 3 and one escapes me, I'm really sorry. So there are some responsibilities that fall to the local authority, so they're a cost on our budget. And there are also elements that are just pure general fund. So one you picked up, which I'll move on to, SEND Transport, is a cost to the council. It's not covered by a government grant for education. In terms of why that's costing us so much more, partly that's one of the key drivers is just the volume of children that need to be transported to suitable placements. And I think in large part that's about capacity in the local market to provide the right kind of placements. We're doing quite a lot of work as an authority to deliver more SEND placements. So if you look at the council's capital programme, there's work in there to support extensions to existing schools and a new school to deliver more SEND placements locally. So obviously the idea being that you transport fewer children outside of Medway and you educate them more locally. But the other drivers for SEND Transport are just the drivers that are affecting everyone who drives, right? So the cost of paying staff to drive people around is significantly increasing, and the cost of fuel shot up over the last year, didn't it? So I think that the cost to the council of delivering that service is significantly high and will be a feature in the new year monitoring, and will be a feature in the budget for the next year, I'm sure. In terms of the questions around the sort of DSG deficit, so you're quite right. Reserves are effectively savings accounts, and we've got a reserve that's an overdraft, right? So the cost of providing suitable placements for children who have special educational needs has far outstripped our budget for a number of years. And if you look at the outturns over the last few years, we've spent more than we budgeted for. And there's a statutory override in place, which is a technical term, which means the government is accepting that that shouldn't be a call on the general resources of local authorities, right? So they're allowing us to park that off to one side, and they're saying, so you can recover that over the medium to longer term, right? You haven't got to charge that to the council taxpayer in year. Medway Council was successful in that we're part of what's called the Safety Valve Improvement Programme. So the government has recognised that we need support to clear that deficit down. And to that end, they've given us an allocation of funding for capital so that we can actually deliver more places locally, and also a revenue allocation to help us to bring that deficit down. And that's all conditional on a 5-year deficit recovery plan. So we're working to make sure that the service is, I don't know, structured appropriately and purchasing the right kind of placements for the right kind of need. And the plan sees us bring that reserve or the cost of the service into a neutral position. I want to say 25, 26, but it might be 26, 27. I'm sorry, the calendar year is swirling in my head. So in the medium term, we've got a means to get rid of that deficit and return the cost of educating children with special educational needs to within the budget envelope. So that one is not causing me to stay awake at night. Legal and governance, so effectively that's a microcosm of the reason why this organisation is doing a review of Medpay and how we retain and reward and attract permanent employees for Medway. So I think Sam talked a little bit earlier, or certainly the performance report talks a little bit about how in children and adult services we've got quite high rates of temporary staff because we aren't able to attract and retain permanent staff. Effectively, in the lawyer market has done the same thing, and so it is much more financially lucrative for an individual to work on an agency basis for local authorities than it is to be directly employed, certainly at Medway. And so that majority of that pressure relates to the fact that in order to provide a functional legal service that supports this organisation in all of its contracting and all of its legal cases, we have to bring in significant additional resource to fund that, and that's coming at a cost that's higher than the budget. There are also, though, some standalone costs relating to the volume of work that's being generated by the progress being made in the Children's Service Improvement Programme, right? So there's obviously a lot of court work that happens in providing a really good children's social care service, and so a part of the cost relates to that. The solution will be, in due course, to implement some recommendations from the Medpay review and hopefully some corrective action that will mean that we can attract and retain more in-house solicitors, which would mean that we wouldn't have to buy in that support externally at higher cost. So we have a plan, I think.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. It's a quick one, well, hopefully a quick one, Kate. It's just about the reserves. So obviously when you wrote this paper, so our reserves are still just above 10 million. Is that correct, as we are now?
Can I, Chair? Yeah.
Sorry, and I'll do the second part. Yeah, go on, Kate, go on.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So if you were really struggling to sleep, you might want to fish out a copy of the council's balance sheet or its statement of accounts, all 120 odd pages of them. And in there's a balance sheet which lists all of the reserves that we've got. Now, there are lots and lots of our reserves that are not usable, so they function purely for accountancy purposes. So they back things like the collection fund, how we collect council tax and what we pay to the government and stuff. And then there are lots of reserves that are also not usable because they stand to do things like the provisions that we write off bad debt against and that kind of stuff. And then there's also earmarked reserves. So there are reserves that are set up for specific risks or for specific purposes, put my teeth back in. So we hold, I don't know, where we've received a grant and we aren't able to spend it all in year, we might roll that into reserves and then draw it down in the future year. So lots and lots and lots of our reserves. What we talk about, or what I flag in that section of that report, is purely our general reserves. So what they represent is the kind of rainy day fund, if you like. Now, back in 2018, when Phil Watts, my boss, became CFO, the council had set a minimum level of working balances of general reserves at 5 million. And in ending the financial year 2017-18, whichever way around it was, 18-19 or 17-18, we had a little over 6 or 7 million. So in his tenure, he has increased that level because obviously we've seen some significant shocks over the last 5 years. And so that our level that we think is the appropriate level to keep as a minimum balance for that is now 10 million. And that obviously is a position that is better than we were in 2018. So obviously we've done some really good work over that really difficult period through all of COVID to build up our reserves to that position. So obviously it's not great to be reporting that they're back at that 10 million, but that also is not a level that is mandated by the government or the auditors even. It's a level that relates to this organisation's risk appetite and how much it thinks it needs to have set aside for a rainy day, I think.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, my second part, Chair, and Katie. So with that, instead of me sitting up all night reading the balance sheet, it might be handy maybe to have at some point just a really quick briefing, a note just about the total reserves would be really handy, because it follows on to my next question. Touch wood, you're going to tell me and reassure me it's not happen. It will never happen. But for example, just recently, Birmingham Council been hit with the equal pay, 700 and so many million pounds, which is almost their whole income for that year. Where would we be with the risk of anything like significant like that happening if it did? And you can always come back to me. You don't have to answer me tonight, Kate, but it's just really interesting for me about our reassurance about where we would be for that rainy day. I mean, that's a big rainy day, 760 million. But I'm just saying, where are we if something like that happened?
Thank you, Chair. So I think that a briefing for members on reserves would be a very useful thing for us to put together. We do include some summaries about our reserves position in the budget report. So when you see the budget report going forward in February, you'll see that. And it's something that Phil and I have talked about expanding, actually. So there is a little section on reserve strategy. I think we want to see us putting a bit more detail in that to give you as members a bit more of an oversight on that. Where we are is a really... you have to be quite a brave person to sit in my position and say too much on that. But I'll give some context, if I may, then. So the local authorities that are in the sort of papers for being, who have already gone to the government and said that they can't function in the budget envelope that they've got, are predominantly, as reported by SIPFA and the Audit Commission, not the Audit Commission, they don't exist anymore, as SIPFA and the regulatory bodies, large part are about governance failings, right? So they're about decisions, they're about borrowing far in excess of their resources to pay that back and that kind of stuff. We're not in that place, right? So we've always been fairly prudent in terms of our treasury strategy. So the kind of the woking of this world, we're not in that place. I think what we're starting to see in the news at the moment is more local authorities who are struggling just because the scale of servicing statutory services is outstripping the pace of grant funding and the ability to raise local taxes at a time when people might not be able to pay those local taxes anyway, right? So I think if I were to comment, the next cohort of local authorities that are being publicised for struggling are less likely, in my mind, to be about pure governance failures and more likely to just be about the sheer difficulty of the situation that the sector is in. To that end, we're working with lots of sectoral bodies to try and lobby the government for better settlements, for more long-term funding settlements, because we've had successive one-year settlements effectively, which makes it really difficult to plan with any sort of long-term horizons. And one of the things that the sector is doing in response to that is starting to publish more data back, right? So one of the things that was launched last week is the Office of Local Government, OFLOG, and they're publishing some data, albeit not the most current data. So the data they've got access to is 20, 21, 22 at the moment. And so they're starting to kind of identify and compare local authorities. And the aim of that, the stated aim of that, is to early identification, early intervention, and working with local authorities to sort of support. And so what we're looking at is what's the guidance that's coming out of those reports, right? What are the commissioners and what are the sort of regulators advising those local authorities to do so that we can make sure that we're on the front foot of all of that sort of best practice. That's not really an answer to where does our actual risk sit. What I will say is, if you look back at the previous item, the highest rated risk on this organisation's risk register is our financial position. We've experienced and weathered some really, really significant shocks in the last 3 to 5 years. I'm fairly confident there are more shocks coming, I think. So, sorry.
Thank you, Katie. Just before I come to you, Councillor Hapwell, I've got a question for you, Katie. On the risk as well. Page 86, now you mentioned uncertainty around future funding. You just alluded to that. The report suggests that this offer an impetus for the council to review the types of services, the council offers and the way it delivers them. Now I'm interested particularly in finding out what services are currently being reviewed, if any. More importantly, what funding ideas have been explored to mitigate the risk identified, what grants are being actively sought to mitigate the risk as well, and what grant has been applied for to support specific initiatives that will also mitigate this rate. I mean, whether you have considered any PPP, whether you explore those options. So I just want to know what we're doing really, what's happening to mitigate against the risks that you identify in the report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of what services or are we reviewing in terms of how we deliver them, I'd probably say all, right? I think that an organisation that has existed for a number of years in the face of increasing demand for statutory services and an appetite to continue to deliver all the non-statutory services that we all enjoy as visitors and residents of Medway, in the face of short-term government funding settlements and reducing government grant for the most part, apart from in the last couple of years we've seen some increase in sort of specific service grants for adults and children's social care. I'd say not enough, but you'd expect me to say that. So in that context, in delivering any service, all service managers and the corporate management team and portfolio holders of both administrations have been encouraging officers to make sure that we deliver things in the most economic, efficient and effective way, right? So that we get the maximum value from the resources that we're able to raise. I think that's all, that in a more specific context, that's always a feature of the budget build process, right? So we go through a process every spring where we try and project what the resource level might look like next year, so how much we're going to get in terms of council tax and business rates and what the government might give us in terms of grant, and we try and match that to projections for what services might cost us. So what's inflation doing, what might we have to put in for a pay award, what might we need to spend on servicing our building estate, for instance. And the two always, since I've been at Medway, have come up with a gap, and the organisation's approach to closing that gap is always, well, let's look again at how we deliver, what we deliver, and this year will be no different. So I can't preempt the results of that process, but I think moving into 24-25, we'll be looking at, again, what services, if not what services we deliver, how we deliver those services. And I think members who were here for a training session, which was delivered prior to this session, would have heard Paul Boyd talking about our plans for digitalisation and Medway 2.0 and how we might improve some of how we deliver in such a way that means that the service that people receive is better, but that we have to spend less administering it. So I'm hopeful that we'll do a lot of that, but there will be some bigger decisions, I'm sure, in the budget bill process, unless government gives us a windfall of grant funding. In terms of how we're seeking grants, I think one of the other things that came out of the LGA conference last week was a statement that government has finally recognised that forcing local authorities to compete with each other to access significant funding pots just causes local authorities to spend lots of money in terms of preparing those bids, and that those authorities that are best at submitting the bids are the ones that get the funding, right? And so the government has recognised that that's not working particularly well for the sector, I think. In terms of what specific grants we've applied for, I think when we have applied, those major grant schemes, you think about like Levelling Up Fund or that kind of thing, they've always been the subject of Cabinet and Council reports. So we've been really transparent about that stuff. And obviously officers are always looking for opportunities to try and access further grant funding where we might be able to, you know, use that to supplement the cost of our own services. In terms of alternative funding mechanisms, I think we've enjoyed a relative stability, I say relative stability, in terms of our finances because we've taken such a prudent approach to our sort of investment strategy, and our we've got very limited investments that relate to anything but vaguely commercial. All of our money is primarily poured into delivering services for the residents of Medway instead of trying to earn money by doing something lucrative over there. And I think that means that we've got a much sort of more liquid and we're better able to respond to financial shocks. And I think whilst we'd obviously be keen to explore any alternative funding mechanisms that might be out there, that would be a matter for the administration and probably the audit committee to make sure that that would be within our kind of prudent approach, I think.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Katie, I'd just like to go back onto SEN transport, and the overspend was about 30%, and that cannot be really accounted for increasing fuel prices and wages, because I'm sure that there wasn't an in-year renegotiation of the prices that we had. So how do we find ourselves in such an awful position with a 30% overspend of a budgeted number is one question. I was interested to read about the overspend in communications on Medway matters, and from memory, I think it costs us about £120,000 a year to produce Medway matters. How do we get some response from people to say that they actually still like Medway matters and it's an informative document and it's still a good process? So have we ever done an audit with the residents? I forget what you call them now, but the resident feedback committee, to say that it's an important document, and it's just to understand whether we still think that it's value for money. The other thing I think that was interesting to read was about the HWRCs and the extra money we got for our waste, and also the extra income we got from Kent. Why was a decision taken to stop Kent using it at all? From memory, before we had the booking system and they could actually work out how many vehicles have been used they were giving us over £600,000 a year to use it, and that seems an
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so send transport then. You're quite right. What happened was our contract term ran mid-financial year to mid-financial year. So when we put together the budget, if I'm correct, we made an assumption about what the increase might look like, which was woefully low. So when the contract was renegotiated, those tender returns just came in at so much more than we had in the budget, but it's a statutory service, we couldn't not deliver it. So in order to make sure that the appropriate arrangements were in place to transport pupils from September, we had to let the contracts at that overspend. So obviously that will be a feature of this year and next year's budget, I think. In terms of Medway matters, that's a really good question that I don't know the answer to, if I'm really honest. I'll have to take that back to communications and find out what sort of market testing they're doing in terms of understanding the effectiveness of that as a communication tool. So we'll take that away if that's okay. The question about household waste recycling centres. So obviously, yes, we exist in times where we're able to sell our recyclate for more than we had budgeted for. So the materials price was really high, and that's quite a volatile figure, so we don't know what that will do. But Kent County Council had no household waste recycling centre facility, I forget which part of the borough now, bordering us, and so they were paying us to allow their residents to use our facility, but they've since opened a new facility of their own, so that cross-border usage doesn't need to be, or they don't need to be paying us for it. Obviously, they're out to consult on their where their household waste recycling centres are, so I don't know whether there's a potential to explore that moving forward. But again, I'll let the service know that you're interested. And then finally, the Pentagon. I think the Pentagon is a really interesting proposition because it was purchased as an asset to enable the organisation to set the direction of what that part of Chatham does, and to take control of that asset was really important in our regeneration aspirations. It has always generated an income. I think the issue is that when we built the budget initially, we assumed that income would be higher than it actually was. In this financial year, obviously, what we've got is we've cleared out the first floor to do the works to enable a healthy living centre to be put on that site. Until that happens, we're paying for the rates for those vacant units, and obviously we aren't earning a rent from them. So really tricky point to draw a conclusion on. Obviously, if that all goes ahead, then we'll have a fantastic asset for Medway's residents sitting in the centre of one of our biggest urban areas. So I'm quietly hopeful.
Just to go back on the HWRCs, if local residents that were Maidstone or Tunbridge and Malling wanted to use it, then surely that would just generate more income, or is the cost of disposing of it more than if we charge them £10 a visit or whatever? I mean, have we done any work to actually see you know, on average, whether it costs us more than £10 or whatever we set as a figure to charge residents of Tunbridge and Moorland or Maidstone?
I don't actually know the answer to that one, but say what, sorry?
No, sorry, this is from the previous administration decision, unfortunately, isn't it? So I suppose it's good to get.
I think what I was going to suggest is perhaps that we just take that away and put it as a feature in the budget build, right? So when we're putting together our proposals for next year's budget, I'll ask that question and we'll get the service to do some work on it, if that's okay.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. It follows on actually from what you were saying yourself, Chair, and in response to Councillor Hatwell's questions about SEN. Surely some of the answer to this is investor save. When I lost my seat in year 2000, at the time we had the old Education Service Committees before the Scrutiny days, the Education and Service Committee had set an SEN plan where we were talking about building more facilities locally to save transporting children long distances, the very thing that the finance officer was talking about. So I don't know what's happened in the intervening years between 2000 and 2023. I could hazard a guess, but I think I'd like to highlight the importance of investor save generally, and this applies also to some of the enforcement issues I was raising earlier in the meeting. For example, if you invest in neighbourhood wardens, you get more and better enforcement. Thank you, Chair. Just a comment.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Katie?
Yeah, just very briefly, if I may. So I think partly the problem in terms of building a budget based on investor save proposals relies on having some semblance of a long-term budget, right? And I think in the successive one-year settlements we've had from the government and in light of a pandemic, that was really, really difficult. But it's an absolute aspiration of the administration and of corporate management team to think much more long-term and to start preparing budgets that are based on, 5 years, 10 years out into the future so that we can start to really work on some of that investor save stuff. So I think certainly for the last 3 or 4 years, it's been a bit of a feature of the curious times we've just lived through, and hopefully we'll see some return to that moving forward.
Thank you, Katie. Don't have any other members indicating to speak, so, sorry, Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams, keep your microphone.
Page 118, 12.1, just about the irrecoverable debt written off in 22-23. I look at the figures there. You said it was 3.2 million just over, which is, as you say, is 1%. It's still a lot of money. I just would like to understand the mechanism when a debt is deemed irretrievable, really, because 3.2 million is a pretty good amount of money, although it's only 1%.
Thanks, Chair. This is a really delicate area, right, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and I have 2 distinct teams in my service, one of whom is responsible for recovering the debt and one of whom is responsible for making sure that we support our residents with all the proper welfare. So I literally have a foot in both of those camps, right? I recognise that in order to provide services for everyone in Medway, we need to collect as much of the tax and as much of the cost of our services that we can legitimately raise through debts to us. And so it's really important that we do follow a proper process to recover debt. Now that is different for every process, right? So if you, have a parking fine, then there's a different recovery process than if you fail to pay your council tax. But what we've got is that's all published in policy or governed by legislation, and I can assure you that what we do is follow those legislative routes. The subtlety around deciding when you don't pursue a debt and you accept that it's not going to be recoverable. Sometimes that's decided for us by a court order, for instance, or sometimes that's because it's just not been possible to trace someone. Sometimes that's just because it would not be financially viable, like it would cost us more to pursue that debt than it would just to write it off, although obviously we don't want to do too much of that. But sometimes I think more and more what we might see moving forward is an issue about propensity and how we work with people who are not able to pay and how we treat them with real care and make sure that we strike that balance between an organisation that needs to make sure that people recover, pay their debt, but also that we aren't kind of hounding people and creating misery in the population. Exactly. So it's a really difficult, I don't really have a perfect answer, but we do everything within the law and within the policies that are approved by this council. So thanks.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Joy.
Just a quick thing, obviously coming back on what Councillor Hackwell said with regards to the waste. Obviously it's been in the news recently that Kent County Council are looking at closing 4 sites. None right on our doorstep, but the likelihood is a domino effect. If they go, it'll put an extra strain on Gravesend and Sittingbourne's. So potentially, are we looking at obviously using that as a revenue stream to, because if it comes our way, I'd rather get paid for it than enough to go and pick it up as fly tipping.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think that obviously we've got mechanisms in place to monitor the use of those facilities, and I think officers will need to be reviewing whether that use stacks up, whether you know, inviting other people to use those facilities would be cost neutral or better, and that will probably be a feature of this year's budget build. I think I wouldn't want to make a decision on behalf of the officers or the administration tonight, but I'll certainly flag it so that it's something that's considered in the budget build process, if that's all right.
Thank you. Councillor Prenton.
Thank you, Chair. This was just a quick one about the irrecoverable debt. I can see there that the housing benefit overpayments, the written off amount has dropped over the last couple of years, but the raised amount hasn't. So what are we doing to stop the overpayments from happening in the first place so we don't have to write anything off? Thank you.
Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So a housing benefit overpayment can be caused by a number of things. It might be a change of circumstances that we weren't notified of quickly enough, or it might be a change of circumstances that we were never notified of for a deliberate reason, or it might be any number of reasons. And I suppose the answer might depend on which route. So if someone is maliciously not updating us, then obviously what we do in terms of that is making sure that we've got a strong fraud response, right? So that people are aware that claims are checked and change of circumstances will be monitored. But I think most likely it's just about a change of circumstance hasn't been notified to us quickly enough, and then people who have got very limited means will struggle to meet an overpayment on top of, you know, whatever other essential costs they've got just to sort of get by at the moment. And so obviously, we work with our claimant population and we work with our providers and we work with the housing team to try and help people to access all the support that they're able, so that they're, that the amount that they're actually entitled to in terms of support is a greater proportion of what they have. But I think that's just a really difficult area. I'm not sure. I think the other thing that my colleague Gemma would say if she was sat here is that the move from government from housing benefit to universal credit is basically taking the simpler cases, right? So if your case is relatively straightforward and your changes of circumstances are not that frequent, you are more likely to be passported over to a DWP administered benefit, universal credit. And so what we're left with is a population of the most complex caseload. And so I think any caseload that's got complexity in it is likely to have error in it. And I think we might well see that continue to climb, actually.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? No. Thank you, Katie. Councillor Brown.
Actually, I want to just talk about the other side of that. And actually, I want to compliment our fraud awareness people and also the people who receive housing benefit. It's actually where we have written off costs against council tax and business rates. And I've continually said this, that actually the hunting of those are one of them is 10 times as much as the housing benefit overpayments, and the other one is like seriously nearly treble that again. So we are talking about 300 times as much as having to be written off in council tax. And if we were to look at this, presumably chief officers are making sure that our resources are targeted properly here, and I would just want to reiterate that actually we need to be properly cognizant of where our write-offs are. And those are the big figures, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Katie?
Just briefly, thank you, Chair, if I may. So absolutely, we make sure that we direct the resources that we've got to the debt that we feel is most likely to be repaid, right? Because that's economically sensible. And I think in terms of irrecoverable debt where we write it off, you talked about business rates. Quite often that's just because business has been wound up, and so there is no one to pursue that debt against. And with council tax, I think a lot of it is often where it's not economically viable to pursue, you know. And when you think about what the court process for council tax recovery, at the point that you're talking about taking someone to court, as in physically summoning someone to court, you're not going to do that for 100 quid, are you? Realistically, right? You're going to do that for someone who has not got the who has got the propensity to pay and isn't, and is doing so over a successive amount of time. I think the other thing that's happened since COVID is the availability of court dates for local authorities has fallen through the floor, right? So actually our ability to even take those small number of cases that we would want to take through the courts to court is diminished. And so I think both of those things are having an impact. I think the other final thing I'd say is that a really big part of the equation for this organisation is us understanding and projecting what our debt might look like, right? And so we do that process every time we build a budget. One of the checks that we do is we try and make a projection about how much of any debt is not going to be recovered for whatever reason, and we make a provision on our balance sheet. So we tuck some money away. That means that if we have to write that stuff off, we do. And then again, Gemma and my team would be sitting in my ear saying that there's some great stuff happening on the flip side of this, right? If you look at what Cabinet agreed last week, a cost of living plan, which includes lots and lots of stuff that's happening in my team and lots of other teams about helping people to access benefits to which they're entitled and encouraging people to reach out to all the organisations and making referrals to other organisations who can help people to, you know, there are government figures talking about the proportion of underclaimed benefit. And so we're trying to work to make sure that we encourage people to claim all the benefit that they're entitled to and that they can access help, that we've got things like the household support fund while that lasts, making sure that people in Medway receive all the support they can, because people who have small, you know, relatively small means, that kind of level of support can really help them to make sure that they meet all of their priority debts and that we're not then recovering money from them as well, I think.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Crozer.
Can I just come back briefly?
Oh, sorry. You'd like to come back. Councillor Brown.
Yeah. We've just written off about 3.2 million, and nearly 2 million of that is in council tax, so that's a lot of £100. I think we need to have some kind of concerted effort to go along with what Katie's saying, and I'm heartily thankful that actually this has been discussed, because that's where I think we have to be more strategic on how we're following our debts here. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Crozer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. If you could just clarify, the reduction in housing benefit overpayment is fairly significant in the 2022-23 year. Are you saying that's a direct result of universal credits, or can you attribute any direct result or any impartial, result to it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Katie, when you're ready.
Yeah. I don't know if you can change the time out on it, you know?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Do it.
So in terms of housing benefit overpayments then, so what we're looking at is a road that says in 2021 we raised just over 2 million and wrote off just under 200,000. And then we raised 2.3 million in 21-22 and wrote off just under 300,000. And then we've raised 2.3 million and written off just under 80,000. That's right. Yeah. That's the line. So I can't sit here tonight and comment on what proportion of that movement directly relates to the shift to universal credit. No. But a really significant proportion of Medway's caseload has been migrated to universal credit. And so we were one of the, they didn't call it a pilot, they might have called it a rapid rapid transfer or something. Medway was one of 2 organisations in the country, 2 local authorities in the country, that started moving or asking people, the managed migration process. So we'd moved 1,000 people over before many local authorities had even begun that process. So I think it's probably too early for us to start to really understand what impact that's having on us. The one thing it will have had an impact is elsewhere in the Outturn report, there's a line about the benefit subsidy. And that was a pressure last year and is likely to be a pressure this year again. And effectively what that means is that in the good old days, if we paid someone £500 in housing benefit, the government would have paid us £500 back in housing benefit, right? So the system basically ran at almost 100% subsidy. Over time, what's happening is that the kinds of claims that are being left with local authorities don't attract 100% subsidy anymore. So they're the kinds of claims that have features that mean that the government's policy means that local authorities should bear some of the cost of providing that support to those individuals. And what's happening with universal credit is obviously they're taking all the cases that attract 100% subsidy. So we're being left with this growing issue. But there is some great work happening. So we were successful in achieving or receiving some funding through the Supported Housing Improvement Programme. So a lot of that subsidy goes, or the subsidy loss is related to supported housing. And so we've now got a team of people funded. They're sitting in housing services in Medway, working with my team and lots of other teams, trying to drive up standards of supported housing and trying to correct, I suppose, the assumption that not everything that we pay out in enhanced housing benefit related to supported housing is actually necessary or is actually being used to the maximum effects. And so that's what that scheme is supposed to do. So we would hope that over time that will start to see an impact in that figure there as well. But yeah,
well, it's interesting actually looking at it that it's during the COVID period too. The 2 years previous would have been COVID as well. So yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kit. Any other member? Over to you, Vice Chair. So recommendation on...
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. The committee has noted the revenue and capital outturn position 17.1 on pages 103 to 102. Further notes the recommendations from members of the committee about a briefing note on total reserves and perhaps an in-person briefing on similar, and also during the budget bill process now looking at a costs usage in regards to waste disposal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 7, employee survey. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. We don't often do presentations at this committee, but given the length of the survey and the breadth of the stuff that we asked this time round, and in comparison to this was the 2019, because that was the last time we'd done it, I just thought it might give some context to some of the feedback we're receiving from our staff and also put some context into some of the stuff that we're doing in response to that. I've got a quick slide pack that I'm just going to take you through. Apologies that it looks really small, but I will highlight the areas that are within your pack that you will see. And really the main purpose of these slides and the illustration around that is the volume of green. So the volume of green is strongly agree. The unhelpful yellow amber kind of one is where people haven't given opinions, they neither agree or disagree, and then the orange is where people are disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. I think one of the things we've noted from this first survey that we've done to this size is, one, it was too long, it was too big. We've had a 58% response rate, which is the greatest that we've had, so it's great that many people wanted to engage, but that would have been up and over the 60% had the length of the survey not put people off. And I think part of the challenge there around this particular survey was because we didn't do it for 2 years because of the pandemic, there was lots of people who wanted to measure lots of things. So for moving forward for this year, we will be condensing that, and that's part of the lesson learned. Within the pandemic, the couple of years that we didn't do the survey, we did not talk to our staff, so we've done a lot of pulse surveys, and we wanted to check mainly on well-being during that time. So they were much more condensed surveys, and they were most definitely focused on people's health, their well-being, their stress levels, and how they were finding the capacity of work. So this particular annual survey is something we've committed to as an organisation. We will, like I say, streamline it. But tonight I'm just going to take you through all of the categories that we offered. And one thing we won't be doing doing next year is having a I don't care button, because that's what it feels like, a little bit of an either agree or disagree. There might be a not applicable button, but it would be good to get the feedback from the people that are there, because it's really difficult to do anything with the volume of people that haven't given an opinion, because it could mean actually it's so bad they don't want to comment, or it's so good they've got nothing to say. So it's really difficult to draw that conclusion. So the first one that's come up there is you at work. So how do you feel about the work within the council? And the ones that I've highlighted are significantly above the 2019 figure that we have. And people are feeling energised, people are feeling motivated, they do want to do the work that they're doing. And it's really pleasing to see the volume of people that are enjoying what they're doing. And I know, you know, we hear about stress levels across the council and the volume of work that's there, but most definitely in this particular slide, people are enjoying the work they're doing. We've cut this data into directorate levels, so we've been working with directorate teams, and we're doing deep dives into where those ambers might appear, just to try and understand what is it about the current work that people do and what they don't like about it. In terms of engagement, of understanding plans and priorities and progress against what we're doing, the top bar there is people that feel well engaged, so just over 40%. And then on the bottom part there is the people that really want to be engaged. And you can see, I don't think you can see, I don't think I can either here. But you can see that there's more people that want to find out more about the plans. So we've been working with the communication and engagements team, we've been working with corporate management team, and really looking at how we can get better engagement, particularly outside of our static buildings like Gunwharf and Broadside, but much more into our satellite sites or where people are working off-site, because we have a lot of people across our theatres, our leisure centres. And if we're constantly doing email activity or MedSpace activity, how are we actually reaching them, and how can we get the message across around plans and progress? And as you've seen tonight, it's a very busy agenda that we've got. So actually, what do people want to know about and what is relevant? So there's further work going into those areas of what people want to hear about. In terms of the team people work within, you can see the sea of green across this slide in front of you. People find their teams very supportive. They find their teams very able in terms of coming up with new ways of working. They feel comfortable bringing those ideas forward. And overall, people within their teams feel a sense of purpose. And that is really good. So the one thing as we go through these slides you will see is people within their local teams are quite comfortable. They enjoy the work they're doing, they enjoy the team they're working with, and they enjoy that immediate line management support that they've got. And this is, again, individuals' views against line managers. And again, quite a bit of green there, and considerably higher than the 2019 results. But what this slide is telling us is that managers are approachable, they are visible, and they do engage with their staff. They're offering performance development, they're offering supportive ways, and they're taking new ideas on board. And I think before the pandemic, everybody was in the building, and one of the things that we moved to was a much more of a hybrid model of working. So people are working much more remotely, and one of the big concerns and risks that we had around that model was this connection to your line manager and the visibility of your line manager and the support your line manager could give you. And what this segment, if you like, within the survey gives us is quite a lot of comfort that managers are maximising the tools that are available for them to still connect with their teams and still be available and accessible to their teams. And in some of the free text comments, of which we had over about 3,000 in the end, people are saying they feel that they're more connected to their manager, because managers are making much more of an effort to use Teams, for example, for a quick start-up meeting at the beginning of the week where everybody is coming together collaboratively rather than quick corridor conversations. Of course, there is a flip side to that you constantly spend your time on Teams because you've got to do 30 minutes rather than 5 minutes, but there is a balance within there. But most definitely people were feeling very supported in terms of line managers. Now, the next slide won't be a surprise. So this is whether or not people were satisfied with the overall reward and benefits of pay here at Medway. So 2019, it was pretty bad, and 2022, it's worse. And we did suspect this. And this is part of the reason we'd already started the MedPay review. So the assumptions were already made. We know what's going on around us. We know the economy. We know the difficulty in recruitment and retention. And that's why it's a corporate risk. So ahead of the survey, ahead ahead of seeing this, we'd already started the Medpay review against the 10% to try a new pay approach and to correct some of the historical damage that we had done across that pay structure with the limitations in the current scheme that we had. And the main limitation to the scheme that we're trying to improve upon is the inability to move through that band. So people were not able to progress against the skills they were bringing to the organisation because the policy as it was would not allow people to move through that band. So we did suspect that this would be quite a poor outcome in terms of the survey. We asked people about other forms of recognition. So one of the top things that came off there was time off. Oh, okay. So one of the top things here was time off. And we've done some staff focus groups to really understand what does that mean. Does that mean we're not paying, we're not giving you enough annual leave against a contract? Does that mean there should be other provisions? Because we do have a host of special leave that allows people to do volunteering days, emergency care days. So what does that really mean? And whilst there was an element of people wanting the opportunity to buy and sell annual leave, which obviously is balanced against the well-being of people taking breaks, we are investigating that. One of the main areas that were coming out quite loud and clear from our staff was, where we're quite a lean organisation, when people take annual leave, they don't want to come back to 2 weeks' worth of work to catch up on. So this is a real issue for us in the sense of, how do we cover that work when people are going out? How do we get the planning better to look at what we're delivering in peak leave periods, for example, over summer? Have we put too much in the aspirations around the service plan for that particular thing? And are we generally taking into account the fact that people do need breaks? There was also with the staff sharing a lot of anxiety of, if you've been off for 2 weeks, logging on Sunday to clear your emails to make a fresh start for Monday, and that was causing quite a bit of anxiety. So across the organisation, people are working in collaboration now, looking at ways we can challenge this. And one of the pieces of good practice that has come out is, if you're off for 2 weeks, book it for 2 weeks and 1 day. That 1 day you're back in the office is your catch-up day. You haven't got meetings. You can actually spend the time catching up on that Monday back in the office, rather than feeling you've got to log on the Sunday to do it because you're straight back into meetings on the Monday. So some of these are really quick and simple solutions, but it's almost like people need the mandate to do it. They need the permission to try this good practice. Within that, we also looked at other forms of recognition, and again, verbal and written recognition came up really high. That's within our gift to do. We can get better at that. And service-specific awards, and I don't know if you're all familiar, but we have the Make a Difference Awards, which the nominations have just closed for. We've had 600 nominations made across the council, which is our best year yet, which is really, really good. People are really acknowledging that this is an opportunity to recognise individual and team and partnership contributions. But one of the things we've done prior to the pandemic was directorate level awards, which meant more people got to have the afternoon out and got the recognition on a much grander and greater scale. And that is something we're really keen to refresh into next year. Time permitting this year, with the changes within the chief executive and other stuff, has just not meant it's possible, because there's quite a bit of work that goes into it. But we're going to be building on that recognition piece, particularly at service level layer, and what more we can do to recognise staff. There was lots of comments on this, and we've taken those comments away to see what's possible. And as I've mentioned, some of these are real simple fixes that we can do and embed with little pressure around it. In terms of working at Medway, you know, this is a bit of a mixed slide in the sense of that sea of yellow that sits there where we don't really form an opinion. But one of the things that stick out for me on this particular slide is, when we're doing exit surveys, the majority of people leaving this organisation will recommend Medway as a place to work and would return to Medway. What we're seeing in this slide is people are not really feeling that connect with Medway. They're not feeling that I'm proud to work with Medway. And again, we've gone out and done a lot of focus groups across this. There is a bit of a disconnect perhaps in satellite sites, again, from that corporate purpose, and that goes back to our communication, which I mentioned on the other side. And there was lots of stories shared with us around we do a lot in Medway, and if somebody's out in a social situation, they say, oh, who do you work for? And they say Medway Council. They tend to get all the questions around council tax, the bins, the litter, and it's a little bit overwhelming. So people tend to not share actually where they work. So I know certainly through corporate management team and the work we're doing across our values, being proud to work for our organisation has to be up there. We want people to feel connected with our purpose and what we're trying to achieve. So this in itself is a big area of work for us moving forward. One of the things we ask in every survey is the future at Medway Council. So the green bar is people who expect to stay here for over 3 years. But more alarmingly, as it goes down, obviously, we've got people that are saying they want to leave in about 12 months or even immediately or under 12 months. Now, I appreciate whilst that's only 50% of the people that completed the survey, which probably is about 500 people. If we're looking at losing 400 to 500 people over a tenor of about 12 months, that is significant for us. That's huge. Now, our turnover rates last year were on average about 5% per quarter. That's big. That was hard to manage. And if we see this kind of mass exodus, this is going to be really, really problematic for us in terms of, you know, delivering what we need to deliver and keeping stability with the staff that we've already got here. So we've looked across this and done a lot of engagement around reasons why people might want to leave. Surprisingly, pay isn't the biggest. It is there, absolutely, it is up there, but it's not necessarily the biggest. And one of the key things that was coming out was the ability to progress and have a career here at Medway and the transparency of those career paths. So one of the things we are really pressing home against the Med Pay review is this isn't about lifting everybody's salary. It is about correcting historical stuff that we need to do to match the market. But absolutely, it's about creating career pathways where people know what's expected of them and how they can progress here in Medway and what that looks like. And having that transparency across that job family where people can progress their careers. In terms of the Med Pay review, we noted that we were going to do a pilot to test some of our assumptions. You know, we've designed this in-house with good practice around us and looking for good practice elsewhere. And we're in a position where about 6% of the organisation will be over the line for the 1st of August, and that will be about 12% by the 1st of September. So we're fast moving into phase 2. And noting this slide in particular with the concerns that we have put some additional resource into the team to onboard more teams quicker in phase 2. So we note that we're on a slippery slope here, particularly given this survey was done in September. So if you're thinking of that 12-month window, you know, we're running on goodwill at the moment in terms of assuring people what we're doing and sharing that. But we've got to move faster and get people onto that a lot quicker. In terms of directorate management teams, so this will be at the assistant director level and their service managers and their directors level. Some of this really does mean that people are feeling a little bit disconnected. Okay, so again, that sea of yellow there is either I don't care or it's not good enough and I don't know what's going on. So we're working with all directorate management teams on how they can share what they're up to, what they're focusing on, how they can get people involved with that, how people can have a voice around that and the priorities that they're doing. And that petters right across the whole leadership team. So in terms of the two-way communication between employees and senior leaders, you would expect as it goes up, it's going to get less because of the distance between those layers and people on the floor. And service managers is the one at the top there. So service managers are still accessible, visible, and are doing what they need to do with their teams. And a lot of service managers, now that we're back and work is BAU, we're doing a lot more of those away days. And the ability of having the virtual away day means if you've got a really big team, actually you can get them together a lot more frequently than trying to find a venue and it becoming quite difficult. But in terms of the assistant director, the director and the corporate management team have agreed that those figures are just not high enough. You know, they're under 50% in terms of people feeling they have that engagement. So we've got a whole plan of how we engage the senior leadership level, right from the chief executive through to the directors and the assistant directors. And this starts with what people want to see and want to happen. What does that mean? Does it simply mean walking through the office and saying good morning, or does it mean focus groups around particular key items? And each service area has got a different approach, and that good sharing, the good practice sharing is something that we're pushing through. But also testing back with the organisation is to make sure it's something they want. We don't want to be doing something that they're not going to buy into or engage with. Supporting change, there's lots of change in this organisation, as you can imagine. It's frequently changing, not least because of the churn of staff, but because of priorities or things that are happening around us. And this slide shows me that we don't manage it as well as we could. And some of the softer information behind supporting change is sometimes just not explaining why the change is happening. Things are happening and we're communicating it, but we're not necessarily explaining why something's happening and what the benefit of that is. And equally, when change is happening, people don't feel they necessarily have a voice in what change might be for the better. So again, that might be down to reorgs, that could be down to changing the plan in which we're doing. So managers now are much more aware of that kind of engagement around managing change, but equally the resilience the workforce needs with the rate of change that we're doing. So that is another key area for us. Our ways of working, which is abbreviated up there, is our new way of working. So as I mentioned before the pandemic, we were very office-based. On occasions, people would work at home, but it very much was occasions, not more than that. And then we were thrust into working at home, everybody. And we had to adapt to that quite quickly. And as an organisation, we've done that really, really well. We really got to grips with the capacity around the technology, the equipment we needed to make the connections, being in that remote environment. And you know, most definitely it changed our approach to how we work moving forward. So we have our ways of working policy, and within that there's 4 work styles. And the 4 work styles are fixed, so that could be you've got fixed contractual hours. For example, you work in a leisure centre or a library, and that is your job. You come in, you do your hours, and you go. There is permanent home working, which is pretty much at home majority of the time, very rarely in an office space. We only have a handful of people there, and that is not contractual, so they are expected to come back to the office whenever required or needed. Then we have a flexible pattern, which means people work pretty much between home and the office depending on what the business need is. And then we have the mobile option, and that would typically be people visiting either businesses or clients, so social workers, for example. And what we tried to do was move the workforce into these 4 areas, really, and to look at what that service offer was back depending on how you was working. And what the next few slides show us, really, is there's probably a little bit more work we need to do. So the one where I mentioned the flexibility of being at home or in the office, some services were left to decide what was needed for the service, which is absolutely right given the diversity of what we deliver. And some people feel that's a little bit unjust because over there I'm being made to come in 2 days, but over there you can work at home for the majority of the time. So there's probably a little bit of inconsistency against some of that decision making because the policy is quite light. But overall, managers are finding our ways of working to be okay. And in particular, this slide, this one looks at the productivity, the ability to be effective in terms of communication, to be able to drive performance and make sure that you understand the well-being of your individual. So managers are not seeing this as a barrier, and most definitely moving into our ways of working, particularly with the hybrid model. One of the concerns was the disconnect, or people would feel that there has to be a presenteeism to be recognised for promotion because you're sitting at home. So, you know, we really wanted to understand how people were feeling about it before we made any further changes. In this particular slide, this is managing in employees. One of the areas we've got to get better at is managing performance in terms of regular one-to-one. So lots of people are having objectives set, lots of people are having performance management positioned and delivered, but what we're finding is not everybody's having that regular review. So part of the Medpay review again is to look at how we have structured career conversations against performance, against delivery, and we're looking at implementing some boxes, some tools that are, for example, like the 9-box grid. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that is about aspiration versus what people are bringing in terms of their work approach, if you like, and how far they're developing that and how far they want to develop. And one of the good things about the 9-box grid, although it's limited, it's quite a simple tool to get to grips with in terms of designing your workforce, but it also allows people not to have to feel they're being pressured to progress and move on, because a solid contributor is just as good in your organisation as somebody who wants to move on. So it's recognising everybody for the place they want to play, providing they're performing right in that way. In terms of asking managers, of course, we asked employees how they were feeling about it. Again, a sea of green. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but very reflective of what managers said, which is good. So it doesn't mean managers are thinking one thing and employees are feeling another thing. But overall, it does marry up in the sense that people are not seeing this as a wrong move. They want us to continue and develop this as a model of approach. They do feel it does support work-life balance and it does make us more attractive as an employer. And most definitely when we're looking at the market and the recruitment that we have to do, we've got to be mindful now that the way of work has changed. So the pool of people we would have been recruiting to before can be wider. That's for us, but it is also for everybody else. And we sit right on the cusp of inner London. We sit right on the cusp of a big county council. And that can make recruitment really, really difficult for us. So we do need to be keeping up with what everybody else is doing around us and opening up our pool in terms of where we look to recruit to. I mentioned wellbeing was measured throughout the pandemic. You know, of course, we do that within every survey. I think, you know, some of the concerns here really is People don't know what support is available for mental health across the organisation. Now, we have a lot of support, but maybe we have too much and we're not signposting it well enough and letting people know about it or explaining it. So there's something for us to do around a campaign of lifting that. And we have a new working group that's been formed, which is the Wellbeing Working Group. We have senior champions that are working with this group, and we've got a number of initiatives that we're rolling out across that particular group to make sure what we're offering is supportive. Going out and doing some sessions with managers, particularly around mental health, managers are struggling to know where the threshold is in between what's my role as a line manager and when does it become medical and when do I intervene and how far do I go. And we've had some, really serious cases around mental health, and managers have been, tasked with some really difficult tasks of managing people, and HR are being there as well. But we do need to do more around that support package for managers to make sure that we're helping people in that point of need and not stepping too far outside of what we should do and confusing it within the medical professional area, and maximising also our occupational health contracts and making sure we're getting the most out of those in terms of supporting us with that particular challenge. At the bottom there with the pie charts, the first one there where you've got quite a chunk of yellow, we asked people how they feel about their current mental health. So this was back in September, and you can see there quite a few people put it down as moderate. Now that's a concern. Moderate is not good, okay, so that is a concern. And some people put very poor. Now, I'm hopeful we know about a lot of those poor cases, but it could well be we don't. People are suffering in silence. So we've had a lot of communication with managers and officers around who you can talk to and where you can get the support as an immediate kind of going out to staff to say, there is stuff available, come and talk to us, please do, it's in confidence. And then just moving on in terms of how people feel about whether or not Medway Council supports people with mental health. You can see there I've circled the kind of orange. There is a cohort of people who don't think we do it very well. So, I'm saying we've got lots of information out there. I'm saying managers are being particularly challenged, but there is a cohort of people who are not being satisfied with what we're doing, and we're delving a little bit deeper with confidence and sensitivities into what that might look like. And then, of course, another risk for us moving into this model of hybrid working was loneliness, people feeling isolated. I mentioned presenteeism before, but again, the big yellow on that particular side is that within a typical working week, how lonely or isolated do you feel? And people are reporting sometimes they are feeling that, and some people put in all the time. Now, we've got lots of programs within mental health that are looking at isolation and social isolation, and we're seeing what good practice we can take within. And as part of that wellbeing group, we're looking at how we bring people together in a virtual environment as well as a face-to-face environment. And we've started doing things like lunchtime walks. We've started to put new clubs into place that perhaps are tallied off before. I think there was a reading club, a knitting club. It was just social areas where people can come along and meet new people and can do it. So we've got a list of stuff that we're attempting to do and testing with people in terms of what they want. And that's, the immediate things, but there is a much more of a longer term plan to tackle some of that. In terms of physical well-being, not many people are taking enough breaks. That seems to be the biggest thing coming out of this slide. And one of the things people were feeding back to us is it's great being able to work at home, but it's also quite hard to put your laptop down and stop. And there's something around expectations. It's great to have flexible working, but we do have an organisation that serves the community at a particular time in the day, so we couldn't expect people to be working at midnight and not be online in the morning because they're tired from the night before. So I think there's still a bit of a balance to strike across the different areas that we've got, and that's where our ways of working policy will pick up some more, I suppose, guidelines on what we need to do, but also this actively encouraging the breaks. That is really, really important. And role modelling behaviour. I had corporate management team for a workshop back in November when the results came out, and we were kind of holding a mirror up to ourselves to say, do we do this? Are we sending emails at unruly hours? Are we taking breaks? Do we seem stressed? And are we asking too much? And we've looked at other things that we can do. So, for example, at the moment, Teams defaults to an hour slot. So could we have it as 55 minutes? So people are at least getting that 5-minute window break before it rolls back into the next meeting. On Fridays, could it be meetings by exception, so people feel they can absolutely just focus on a Friday and wrap up for the weekend, those who don't have weekend work? So again, this could be real within our gift stuff that we can do as an organisation and make some decisions on. But all of this we're testing with the services to see what would work. So the last thing we'd want to do from the corporate centre is make a decision that would add unintended consequences to a business area because they've got something that's working really well. Almost there, thank you for bearing with me. Inclusion and fair treatment. So in terms of people coming to work, the top question there is I feel comfortable to be myself at work without fear of discrimination. And the orange that I've circled there is people that strongly feel they cannot. And that should be zero. There shouldn't be anybody coming to work feeling there is a fear of discrimination. And this goes across a whole agenda that we're looking at across inclusion, bullying and harassment, because on the far side there against the bars, you've got if people have ever experienced bullying, harassment or discrimination since they've been here, and that's up in the 20%. That is so high. As an organisation, we're absolutely devastated to see that there. That just shouldn't be the case. And of the people who've reported it, not everybody's reporting it. And that's a real worry as well. Really, really is a worry for us as an organisation. And of those who are reporting it, not everybody's satisfied with the outcome. Now, you know, we need more people reporting it in the first instance to determine whether or not the outcome is satisfactory. We did launch a speak up policy, which was a whistleblowing policy, and we tried to change the name of the whistleblowing policy because that sounds quite like you're whistleblowing on somebody. So we wanted to be more speak up and come forward, and we changed the policy. We've done lots of work to integrate the policy. We've done lots of training. We've done lots of awareness, but it still feels there's just something there that people are not comfortable or don't know where to go. So this is a whole piece of work for us, particularly from the corporate centre across bullying and harassment. We've done deep dives into service areas. We've looked at patterns across the data that we've got, and we are working in pockets across the organisation to really understand what is going on. And some of this is about simple things, again, like inclusive language and microaggressions. You know, people are not intentionally outwardly necessarily bullying people, and there's an assumption that's been made that it might be leaders bullying subordinates. That's not the case either. It could be peer-to-peer, and what we're hearing from the softer feedback and most definitely from the comments that came in from the survey is some people behave in a particular way, and because they've done it for a long time, it's just allowed, and that's not okay. You know, so there is still some real cultural things that we're grappling with as an organisation, and this survey gives us a real indication of where we need to pinpoint that and the actions that we need to put in place to deal with that. So some great stuff in the survey, but some real concerns as well. So just to summarise, we've got lots of positives to celebrate, and that's really good. You know, managers absolutely and teams are doing fantastic things. Our flexible working and approach is going well. People are having targets and PDRs, just not regularly. Induction came out really well in terms of us inducting people. Teams are being very supportive, and one of the things that came up high was we do talk about mental health. We talk about it a lot, which is a start, and it's really good. And line managers at all levels across the organisation are doing a tremendous job. They're really doing well. The areas of improvement that we need to do is most definitely visibility and engagement of senior leaders. That is something we've got to work on, as well as the communication around the council plans and projects that we've got ongoing and why things are happening, thinking back to managing change. Rewards and recognition, we know we can build on that. We've got a very great employee value proposition, and you've got that in the appendix within the report that tries to bring together all of the stuff that we've got on offer for our employees, and we've turned that into our people promise. So come and work at Medway because we can promise you these benefits. We're developing that all the time, constantly. You know, and whatever's being requested and asked for, we're looking at ways that we can do that to make the whole benefits package attractive, not just about the pay. I've mentioned bullying, harassment and discrimination, you know, a huge concerning area for us. And one of the other areas we tested was the values, so the council values. Again, you'll see within the appendix what our current council values are within the plan. We want to change them. We are going to change them. We've got work already underway. Lots of great suggestions came from our staff on what they would resonate with being a council value. And we've got a session coming up with corporate management team to really review that and look at what that might be and do further engagement with staff. Because going back to that slide where we want people to feel connected, you've got to start with your values. What is it you're trying to do as an organisation? What's your purpose and why you're doing it? So we've got to start there. Turnover and the risk to that, you saw the slide whereby people said that they don't want to stay here. You know, we've got lots of good things going on. We're talking about it lots with people, but that is a real risk, and that's why it's on the corporate risk register. And of course, I mentioned mental health. So just to finish up, some of the stuff we've been doing then, we've spent considerable time with corporate management team really going through these results, thinking about the priority areas. We can't tackle everything. That is absolute, and I think that the limitations that have taken place before is where people have tried to cover everything and done it very badly, so nothing's moved forward. So we've been very clear with the organisation what our priorities are, and you've got, again, in the appendix, you've got a draft action plan of the areas that we're going to focus on. We've done lots of work with our service managers collectively. They are our key people within this process in terms of the connection back to the floor. Phoenix is the group that was set up around our ways of working. So it was a selection of people across the council who could keep an eye and test what was going on with that decision around that policy. So that group has already formed, and that group will be taking forward the recommendations against our ways of working. I mentioned communications team. Communication engagement is absolutely key. We've got a whole new approach to our communication engagement across the whole organisation, starting with the chief executive all the way down. We've set up new channels in Teams. For example, we've got a service manager channel now, which is a need-to-know channel, so emails are not missed. So if there's a key piece of information the service manager needs to get out to our people, they go to that channel each week and they'll be able to see very clearly what the key ask is and what the call to action is. So we're trying to streamline the communication and make sure people are focusing on the things that are going to make the difference. Lots of staff drop-in sessions, so for staff to come and offer some more context to some of the results or share some more feedback in that. And that's also resulted in some one-to-ones, confidential one-to-ones, where people haven't wanted to put something in writing or share it with a group of people, which has given us invaluable insight. And directorates have been tasked with coming up with their own action plans. So whilst we will have a corporate action plan, each directorate will have a slightly different issue that they might need to grapple with, and we want them to focus on what they're going to do differently within their directorate and within that service manager session. We have something in Medway called Medway Makers. So this is a selection of people who opt to come forward to join my team around the engagement journey. And by doing so, they share what's going on the floor. They share what people are feeling, what people are thinking, and key issues that perhaps we haven't been brought to our attention yet. It's a very engaged forum. It's a two-way forum, so we will share things with them. So if we're moving forward, for example, with the employee voice strategy, we will go straight to that forum and say, hey, have a look at this. What do you think? This is what we're trying to achieve. Do you think it'll work? And they'll go back to their service areas and test that with their teams as well. So we're making sure we've got that dialogue going up and down. And there's an open door for the Medway Makers to come to corporate management teams. So if something that the Medway Makers are pushing, instigating and hoping that will happen, we will make sure that they're fore and foremost front with senior leaders so they can have those debates themselves rather than it being featured through HR. I mentioned there's a whole host of data behind this survey. It's a lengthy survey. We do ask for additional information like gender, age, disability. It's voluntary if people give it, and it's completely anonymous. But what it has done is enabled us to really cut the data to see if there is disparity and if females and males are being treated differently, disabilities being treated differently, different ethnicities are being treated differently, and it's allowed us to really get into the granular detail. That deeper dive, we have an equality board, which is an internally focused equality board that will have privy to some of the findings from that. And further, we do further communications with trade unions, and ultimately anything we're putting forward, like the employee voice strategy, will go through the Employer Matters Committee, as well as here tonight with you all. So where are we and what do we have to do? So, there's a host of stuff we've been doing around engagement here to really test those results. We don't want to make any assumptions here. The fix we need to put in has to be the right fix. So we're in a point where we've got this draft action plan that you've got in your pack today. We want to launch that employee voice strategy to the rest of the organisation. It hasn't quite been signed off by corporate management team, so we've had some feedback and some things to consider. Very soft things. So, for example, we've got stock photos on the front, and they would like real staff on the front. Some really engaging points on it. So we're just working through the next part of that, and then this for me becomes BAU. It's not an action plan that sits to the side. Engagement and communication is what we do. This is what we do for our staff, and this is how we do it. So yes, we will have those themes running where we need to get better and we need to tackle it and we need to measure it. But overall, this is BAU in terms of how leaders and staff engage and communicate with each other. I mentioned it's an annual survey. Typically, we run that in a September. Given the work that we've put into this communication, we're proposing that we run the surveys in May, and that gives us a little bit more time to embed the strategy, and then when we're measuring it, we can actually see if what we've put forward makes a difference. So there is a proposal to move the annual survey to May, much more condensed, and focusing on the key areas that we say we are going to make a difference on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for the report. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sam. Can I first of all apologise? I mean, I couldn't. It'd be really good, Chair, if we can. It would have been really good to get that report before tonight because there was so much detail in it. It would have been really good. And even with glasses, I still couldn't see the little bits. I tried. And Sam, I must apologise because I've been calling you Samafa because that's what it says on your thing. So, can I just start by saying actually I'm quite disappointed in the survey and I'm going to explain why. I think, number one, I suppose, my concern is this was 10 months ago, 9-10 months ago. Some of the issues in this survey are quite serious. You know, even if you go down to that small percentage that felt they were bullied, that 43% that could be potentially have some mental health deterioration, we're talking 10 months ago. So really, the report is here this evening. And I'm not talking it down for you, Sam, because I know that you and your team do a lot of work. But I'm going to say it could be actually irrelevant because we don't know what's happening out there now. And you know, I'm going to start at the back, I think, of where I'm going to ask the questions because, first of all, I was going to ask you the question. You did answer a lot of them as you was going through, so it's really handy because I was thinking December 2019, why did it take 3 years? And then it was annual. I thought, brilliant, annual, because I would be doing this 3 monthly at the moment, not annually. And then all of a sudden, we're now moving it to next year. I don't see why we're doing that. Because for me, you know, I was going to ask you, the question I was going to ask you was, how satisfied are you with the response? And of course, and I will congratulate you on, I like things like these, and some of the other members do, when we get, especially in health, when we get a nice spreadsheet which shows you some designs, I like it. So, you know, that's better than loads of writing, you know. But, and I know we're going to try for, you try for the staff to bring out the good stuff. But there isn't a lot of good stuff that I'm reading. And maybe it's because we're sitting back and we're not in, and we're not seeing all the other great stuff you're doing. But if I was on ONS, which I do on health, and I was calling in the ambulance service or calling in one of the other people, we would be going hell on leather if we saw surveys like this coming from them. And we do. And I can't sit here, you know I can't sit here and not pull out some of the really disappointing stuff because it would be really unfair. And once I got round the, you know, yes, of course, pay 28%, people never, you know, people are not going to be happy with pay, and you're doing stuff about that. 8% wanting to leave. I wonder what it is now. I wonder if you've done a poll now, I wonder what that would be. Because I would suspect, or maybe before May, I would suspect it's higher than that. And you know, once I got round the aspect of wow, and I did find it, I found what it meant halfway through I kept reading back on the pages. That figure of 43%, with the deteriorating mental health, I don't know why there's not alarm bells ringing with that. Because, you know, we talk about the hybrid working. I don't want staff to think that I'm going to say we shouldn't be hybrid, everyone should be back in the office, because we may not have space for them to come back in some of the places we operate. But, you know, it has been proven that for a lot of people, that home working does impact their loneliness. We are a council that has we used to have a loneliness champion. You know, social isolation was our big theme, and still is in public health. Yet we could have staff sitting at home, won't own up to their managers necessarily, or won't want to be not part of the team, that could be severely isolated. And that may not want to reach out. And I'm talking about young men here as well that will not reach out for that support. And by the time you find out, it may be too late. So, you know, when I know there are, and sometimes online groups is not good enough. Face-to-face, CBD, you've got to really get into these people that are not coming to you, but hopefully line managers are spotting them early signs. Because I'm not sure we are. And, you know, especially now, and I'm going to keep repeating it, especially now I know it's 10 months later, I'm mortified with that. because the other results are all wonderful, but actually, unfortunately, it gets overshadowed. And I know you said potentially. Potentially is the word, isn't it, here? But when you've got potentially that amount of people, even if you broke that down to 20% or 15%, still 15% too many. That could have there could be consequences going on there we don't know, we know nothing about what's happening. I know that's not, you and your team can't be on it all the time, but I don't know why we haven't done some interventions one, I don't know why it's taken 10 months to get here, and sorry, Chair, I'm going to keep saying it. But secondly, and presumably, maybe you might just shake your head or nod, has it gone to Employment Matters? Has it gone to before here? So they've seen this not too long ago. But for me, I'm going to ask that question about the hybrid approach, and I know it worked. You're telling me it says in the thing it's working. I'm going to put my hand out there and say that, yes, you've got 3 or 4 different versions of it, but maybe 1 or 2 of them versions are causing that social isolation, that loneliness, and it might have to be adapted. But I suppose you're not all scientists but we have got expertise in our organisation to look at that, because maybe it's something we need to look at. And, we talk about also the inclusion. You used to be a time, I don't know if you still do, you used to have all different groups, LGBT, black and ethnic, you used to have all them groups that would tell you and be very upfront about bullying in the workplace. Because even one person up there that's being bullied is one person too many again in our organisation. We're supposed to be a really good, inclusive organisation. And, again, I'm talking about some of the partners we've just done work on that have got similar stats to that, and we've absolutely torn them apart. One is too many with the bullying. That leads to mental health breakdown. That leads to feeling isolated if they're getting that. So I suppose the last 2 things I would say is you need the budget to actually sort this out, and that's down to Cabinet, that's down to the team. But, you can invest in so many different mechanisms to help and support our staff, but if the budget isn't there, it's not going to help them at all. And outcomes is what we're saying. And I know you've just told us, Sam, about some outcomes. Councillor Brown mentioned it earlier, but I suppose you could give me some examples, and I won't put you on the spot. But when you come here now, 10 months later with this data, it would have been great to have a whole page there of telling us the massive impact it's done on people with mental health. And 10 months may be too soon, but I'm going to say to you that the early intervention that you've done straight away to look at this mental health issue, and I'm not seeing those outcomes, so I'm not feeling assured tonight. And please, again, as I finish, don't take it as a criticism of you and your team, but to me, it's too little too late when it comes 10 months after. So really, the data you're telling me, I believe looking at the 219 and 222, there were similarities in a lot of it. Your happiness percentages went up slightly, which is good. So that would tell me that probably when you do it next year, them other horrendous stats will go up. I see it in other places, and I hope you tell me next year, if I'm in May, no, that you're incorrect. But I would really seriously try and reconsider, 1, making it a yearly, 2, doing some interim ones as well, and having your teams join in, like public health or outside experts. But definitely don't leave it too long, because you don't want something happening that you'll be reporting here that we won't be, that we'd be thinking if only we stepped in a bit earlier. But it's just, you've got our support. But I'm really concerned with the report. But thank you anyway for that. And if we can have the reports, I'd really appreciate it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Medway. Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all your points. Couldn't disagree with anything you say there. I think the report coming this late doesn't suggest we haven't done anything. I think that's the bit I do want to reassure you on. We've got an overall corporate strategy that we want to progress. Some of those are long-term gains and not going to be quick interventions. So that's more of the long-term stuff. We need the kind of resource and the budget to support it happening. So just to give a bit of an indication around the period from September to now, where we've done the deep dives into directorate areas, we've been running pulse surveys with particular teams around particular themes that might be a concern. So if in a particular area bullying and harassment was really high and people didn't feel they could talk about about it. We've put in already things like I've gone along and spoke about the Speak Up policy. We've mentioned the other avenues people can go to. We spoke to the trade unions around them promoting the Speak Up policy in case people don't feel they can put formal grievances in. And then there's been pulse surveys along with that. So most definitely it's not a position where we've sat and done nothing. The engagement started absolutely immediately. I think, you know, the other stuff we've done is we have Care First as our provider. So we've worked with Care First around some bespoke packages and webinars. They're not face-to-face, admittedly, but they are webinars. And we've taken some tools from them and incorporated that within the way we work across how we're doing things. The hybrid working, when we've gone out to speak to staff and some of the pulse surveys that we've run, particularly around the isolation, surprisingly, some of that in the early stages was because there was nobody in the office anymore. And actually the isolation was coming to work because there wasn't a team there, and it wasn't the same as it was getting a cup of tea in the canteen. And I think even if you look, I mean, today and now, you mentioned the difference now is the canteen's full again. Back in September, it was dead. There was nobody here, particularly on a Friday. It was like ghost town. So the interventions we've put in place in terms of giving people reason to come in and purpose to come in has developed and helped. Now, don't get me wrong, we get a lot of criticism now with the car park. So we're getting issues with parking because there's lots of people in there compared to when we first put that policy in place. But most definitely all of those smaller interventions that are going to make that immediate difference and understanding where the problems are across the organisation, we have been mapping, supporting and absolutely being on. You know, we have mental health champions. So we've done a lot of work with the mental health champions. We had a time to change pledge. We're doing work around what that looks like, what worked then, what didn't work, what can we do. We're doing lots around Train the Trainer, which is the public health programme, so that we're rolling out some more people across Medway are trained, and that's already in flight. We've been doing that since we learned of the issue that we've got. So a lot of the activity won't be in the action plan you've got. I, by all means, can kind of list the stuff that we've done between then and now, just to give you some assurance that we haven't waited for 10 months to understand the results. I think that's the key thing. I guess in some business areas, we haven't moved as fast as we wanted, and one of the things I didn't show today was the timeline. Okay, so there was a commitment across the timeline that when we were going to corporate management team, when we were going to service levels, when we were expecting things back, we do have a couple of outstanding action plans. But again, it's not to say work isn't happening, because HR are in there working with those service areas. We just know we haven't captured it in the action plan for that particular service. You mentioned the networks. We do have networks. They all come along to the Equality Board. We lost our networks and the motion around the networks and the positivity from the organisation. So in HR, we tried to orchestrate some. And what we found is, whilst we've done that around protected characteristics, there's other areas that need support. So divergence, carers, in terms of parents, single parents. And what we're doing now is trying to get the organisation to think about what support networks it needs, rather than just what the Equality Board and the protected characteristics are. So again, I expect that to grow as we start to understand where people feel they need that support. There isn't a huge budget that goes with networks, but we do put some budget towards the networks, so the conferences can be attended, or if there's a particular thing that they're celebrating as a cultural thing, you know, lanyards or pens can be purchased, just to kind of try and raise awareness and get more membership into those groups. So they are active, they are encouraged, and we do make sure that the Equality Board is their route into senior leaders, of which my boss, Phil Watts, chairs. And that has a programme in its own right. And again, that goes to Employer Matters Committee. You asked me if I was satisfied with the response. I was asked at Employer Matters Committee, I think Councillor Hackwell was there at the time, what I'd be happy with when we launched the survey. And knowing what we had in 2019 and knowing the engagement, I wanted 70% at least, okay? Now, I didn't think for a minute I'd get more than that, because most definitely there's a cultural shift here around us saying what we have, what we're going to do, and proving we're going to do it. So certainly some of the feedback and some of the people and the resistance to filling the survey came from people going, what's the point? You're not going to do anything with it. So I knew we had to prove that we were going to do something. So I would have been happy with 70. I said that I would settle for 60. It was slightly below that, and that's why I mentioned, probably for my own sanity there, that it was probably the length that put people off completing it. So we took some partials, but it wasn't a full representation. I want to grow on that. I want to build that. It was the Medway makers that suggested we push our annual survey to May rather than September. And that was simply because they didn't feel they'd had enough time to engage locally as well. So we have listened to the organisation in terms of when they want to fill in another survey and tell us about it, because of the pulse surveys we've done, because of all the forums that we've done. And most definitely, I think there's an element of us still around our pay review to build trust. So previously, when there was a pay review, there was some contractual changes that were made where trade union report, I wasn't here at the time, that people were going to be dismissed if they didn't sign new terms of reference. And we've been very clear with this pay review that it's about engagement and that we are honouring salaries and we're not taking money away from anybody and we're not changing contractual terms. We're enhancing the system that we've got. But with the small amount that we've managed to get over in phase one, because actually as we're looking into this, there's a lot more things to do than just the pay review. There's lots of policies to change, lots of ways of working to change. We are a little bit behind the curve in where we wanted to be with that projection. So I think we've still got a lot of trust to build in the organisation, and that trust building is so important given that figure of people that want to leave, and that's probably where we're spending a lot of our time. So you know, I could give you a calendar of engagement activity that we've done, drop-in sessions, Q&A sessions, all the tools that we've got available for people to come and ask questions, and that has been our sole focus actually, to get out, to listen, to talk and respond quickly to what we really know what's going on. So yeah, I appreciate it is 10 months late, and maybe it's something we might want to discuss on the forward plan to come here a bit earlier, because the results are available a couple of months after the survey closes, once we've had a chance to do it. And typically we would go CMT, session with service managers, EMC, and then eventually onto ONS. The time lag, it's happened. You're right, it is slightly out of date, so maybe we should be coming earlier with the next survey to you.
Can I just say, Chair, could we ask the Vice, could we maybe have a recommendation? It's also, I don't want you coming back every time saying with another poll, but I think it'd be good to have some reassurance before next June or July when your next survey's out, because I don't know what members feel, but some of that reassurance, even if it's a written briefing, just to say we are doing more, we're doing some stuff with mental health, I think that we should be on it, because it's something that that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mudgett. Vice Chair, I've noted that. Councillor Joy.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at a few of the figures on there. With regards to the actual people that did it, one figure stands out is regeneration, culture and environment at 43%. So it says 57% have not engaged with this. Wonder what's been done to engage with majority of that 57%. On the next bit, with regards to well-being, one of the comments with regards to financial well-being and the pay not being good enough, one of the comments made was discounted use of council leisure centres. Well, from my understanding, the council leisure centre, with the exception of the Strand, that normally runs at 100% when it is open, all the rest run at a fraction of their capacity. So if people are willing, that work for us, are willing to pay a discounted amount, that is money that we're going to get in where we're not going to have any additional costs. So the fixed costs for running them centres, if you've got 20 people in a swimming pool, or you've got 100 people in a swimming pool, it's going to cost us exactly the same amount in now. But there's obviously potential there for revenue, and also giving something to the people that want it. Because charging them at full price when we've got half-empty leisure centres is ridiculous. There's an opportunity there. With regards to when you're saying we've surveyed the annual surveys, I work for quite a big company, Rentokil Initial, and they used to do these surveys, and they used to do them once a year, and the actual engagement on them was very, very poor. And the reason it's very, very poor is that you do it every year and you don't see anything. I'm assuming that all the teams that have regular team meetings, monthly or quarterly at the very least, you've got a list on there, which Councillor MacDonald just showed, of our core values and commitments. Can HR, as part of a slides package on the core values, being in every one of them team meetings, we committed to do, what have you done? So you're actually showing them. So when it comes down to the next annual survey, people were in the 43%, the 57% in regeneration, culture and environment going, they're actually doing stuff. And they're showing us they're doing stuff. and they're communicating it back on a regular basis, you'll pick up the engagement. At Rentokil Initial, they went from figures of about 27% to one of the departments, so the pest control side I work, had 100% response on it because they saw that they were getting communicated back. And it also gives you the opportunity then to pick up stuff and pick up how people feel. And the shout out thing, if you're showing them that you're committing to it on a regular basis, you're probably going to get more engagement coming back and more support on that. I was concerned with the feeling of loneliness. You've got nearly 50% of people sometimes or more. So with regards to employees working home, is there people that work at home full time? What is being done to make sure that the environment they're working in is fit for purpose? Our line managers going in and going to see them. I work from home. I sit on a sofa and slouch on a laptop. Health reasons is probably horrendous. Majority of my work is I'm back in pest control. Pests won't come to my house. It's not good for their health, so I have to go out. But there is times when I literally sit on a laptop, and that is not. So for me doing that a couple of hours a day, yeah, it's probably not good for me. But if somebody's doing that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, posture and everything, we've got to make sure that where they are is fit for purpose. And like I said, is that encourage people to come into the office in teams. They have a particular day, they all come in, so discounted lunch day or something like that. So you're encouraging them so they are engaging with other members of teams. I'm just wondering if something like easy wins like that can get implemented on a quick basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah, again, some great suggestions. I've taken a note of everything. You know, we're not perfect in every area, but I can give you a little bit of feedback around some of the stuff we're doing with the comments you made. So in terms of the 43% in RCE, this is where we've got our remote sites, the majority of them, so that's our libraries, our leisure centres, and we're working with the service managers and communications and engagement team around how we can better communicate with them. And most of the issues with the staff survey being completed was they don't sit at a PC. They're not sitting there going through it, so it's not something they're going to do. We had paper copies available, but the length of the survey was just too daunting and people didn't want to complete it. So we are learning from that experience, and we're certainly working with the managers in those sites. Now, we know, for example, within the theatres, one of the managers we've got on our Medway makers, and some of the stuff we're looking at in terms of that social engagement is a picnic for everybody in the summer and doing it over a couple of days so people come in and start that network. And they are sharing with us some of the stuff they already do, but it's how we bring them into the fold. So we are working with them around opening up that connectivity of some of those days. The same goes for all staff events. A lot of teams are getting people together. They are large teams and we don't have the facilities, so we're being quite creative in how we can do that, and summer definitely makes it a better opportunity. But having said that, even the chief executive is thinking about whole staff away days where he can bring all of the teams together and what that looks like. So again, having purpose to come in is one of the key things that are in the communication plan and has been happening. So, you know, even within my own team, the HR team, we first came together when we came out of the pandemic. And even being a HR professional, one of the things I probably didn't consider was the anxiety of people coming into a bigger room with everybody again where they hadn't been socialising. So we're starting small in some places, but in other places we've got big team events already happening. And we're making the use of the other buildings we have available to us. So some people have done like an away day at Riverside, for example, and we're getting really into the throes of going back to those planning events, those away days, those team building events, and most definitely for the HR one where people hadn't met for a long period of time. Most of my purpose that day was team building actually, and we built a marble run and, you know, things like that to put some fun back into how people come back together. So that is something that is happening across the organisation, most definitely, but we could do more of it. In terms of leisure centres, we've just produced a paper around leisure centres and giving back that as a benefit to individuals. So a lot of that is, as Katie will say, is determined by income-driven targets, but we're at the right point to be having the conversations around the medium-term financial situation and what that might mean. So if we are going to do it, how do we fund it? But that's absolutely part of the the point that's been put forward around the other benefits. We're looking at other things like cycle to work schemes, salary sacrifice as well. But, you know, there was a number of suggestions that come through that we're almost working through and seeing what we can do around that. And some of those we've already put into play. I mean, 100% completion rate is amazing, absolutely. So we're definitely aspiring to get there. And I think you mentioned the values around people feeling that the organisation is responding and doing what it says it does. Our values, if you look at them, probably are not all values. Some of those are aspirations or goals that we want to do. So we've got to review those. And most definitely, as the organisation has come back through the staff survey, they've said, you know, we want different values. Now, for me, it's not just about reviewing those values. It's about what we do with them. So some of the stuff we've done already is, in terms of like the MAD awards that I mentioned earlier, we've got different categories that look at teams, partnership, community, but we want to do it around the values, for people to really demonstrate how they've done something remarkable around those values. In terms of the Medpay review we've done and the end of year performance appraisal or the point of somebody moving through that career pathway, again, the evidence has to be around the values, so your day-to-day work and how that's living the values. And there's peer-to-peer nominations where someone recognises somebody doing it and they can nominate themselves rather than it just being on managers. So we have a bit of a list how we can embed this as something we live and breathe rather than it just being a pictorial that we put out on a job ad. And for me, it's part of the attraction strategy. You know, it's got to be something that we resonate as an organisation so that when we are attracting people, it's people that are coming because of who we are and what we do and how we do it. So a lot of work is going into that. And we did say that is something that is really, really important. And at corporate management team on the 26th of July, we've got our first discussion point on what they look like, because we've been doing the engagement with the teams around what they'd like to see in terms of our values. The loneliness and the working at home, you mentioned there around environments that people are in. If anybody is a home worker and they're spending the majority of their time at home, there is a display risk assessment we would do around how they're set up, because we don't want long-term health problems for individuals. So we have a small health and safety team, and we have a number of other people in each team that are trained to either do it virtually if people don't want to be intruded within their homes, but they don't have a choice if it's a permanent working at home contract, if it's just hybrid. But we look at the equipment they've got, we look at where they're sitting, and we have had some real difficult situations where people are living at home still with mum and dad and they're sitting on their bed, unsupported on a laptop, and that's not what we want to encourage. So there has been some difficult conversations where we've had to help and work with people on that. And some of that also is around adjustments and disabilities and making sure the right equipment is available for access to work. So a lot of work has gone into those display risk assessments for individuals in their home environment. And we constantly raise awareness around a lot of statistics that public health have is around sitting down too long and not standing up working, and high-rise desks, and looking at whether we can get discounts for people with home equipment, so that the desk is something that you can have up so you can stand up and work rather than just sitting down. So we're looking at all the health benefits around how you work and the environments you're in as you work, as well as our own building here actually, and we have a few more standing desks that do that. I think that might have been all the kind of bits you mentioned. We're by no means perfect in any of this. We've started the journey. There is a lot to do. And, you know, all of what you've offered me tonight is really valuable, and we'll be taking all of that away to make sure that that is something we can report back on in terms of that journey we've made with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. I found that absolutely fascinating. So interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but myriad expressions going through my face. I found myself reflected as, you know, my own experience as an employee in different sectors so clearly in that. What was I going to say? Right, so there's so much in there that sounds amazing. The fact that you have such a set of flexible ways of working for people, so people can feel more empowered in their lives and how they choose that. And then you've got all these work groups where employees are directly contributing to see to tell you what will work best for them. You know, all the well-being tools and resources on hand. Amazing, it sounds great. Unfortunately, my experience has taught me to be a bit skeptical about all of that. That's just been the reality. So the last organization I worked for, I read the job description, I met them at interview, and I was buzzing because they said all these things. And they said, you know, we value you, we want to make you feel empowered, you're part of the organization, you're part of designing the future for us, and all that stuff. in the end, after about 5 years, the reality of it was, I mean, we all as employees, we invested hours of our time and thought when we were not at work, thinking about what should be our organization's values, what's our culture like, how can we do better, all of this, because we felt we had a stake in it. But at the end of it all, it was a very pretty document that just did not translate to us. We felt so disconnected with it. And why that hurt more was, so I've worked in corporate IT, and I've worked in education, and I've worked in the voluntary sector. So corporate IT, completely detached. It was so hard to care about the impact when it's somebody's software system that's down and they can't send emails. And you think, you know, okay, fine. You don't get out of bed for that kind of stuff. But then I worked in the voluntary sector where, you know, it would make me get out of bed. It would make me, you know, leave my children's dinner on the table and rush to something because I felt there was an impact. And so people get out of bed for that kind of purpose. They have that purpose. But I think you kind of risk not valuing people enough if you don't take the kind of time investment that people put into all of this. You know, they've really got to feel that it's not tokenistic, you know. It's so important. So you sound really passionate, and that's very, very reassuring. And you sound like you're on the right track. You're saying all the right things. It's exciting. But I guess I implore you to just always remember that at the end, that employee, it's no good saying you're empowered. They have to feel they're empowered, and they have to feel that they are actually contributing to something. And that wasn't a question, so I don't know if I added any value. But I do have one quick question about impact. Do you have a way, I mean, you already picked up on this really, that some employees, especially in satellite centers, don't feel connected to your organizational purpose or impact. So is there a way that you can, or do you already do this? Is there some kind of impact report? Not like a report that's 50 pages that nobody's going to read, but just regular updates about, here's a person in that flat over there, this team's work has just changed that person's life. Because I think that's what a lot of people in the public sector, that's why they do this, because, you know, you are right, it's not all about money. It is about that impact. So I just wondered what your mechanism is to feed that into all the people who are just sat behind a screen and emails and maybe they don't see what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your support across the agenda again. And, you know, I guess just sharing a bit with you around, you know, I am optimistic, I am passionate about this, but also I can remove my rose-tinted glasses and understand what's going on. And I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head there where you said that you joined an organisation and it was all shiny and nice and great, and actually when you was in it didn't feel that way. One of the things we've been doing with Business Change is looking at our onboarding. So we're looking at the point of an advert going out, somebody being attracted to us, how they're treated through that onboarding process when they land with us, and then between 6 and 12 months of them being here. And we've carried out a lot of surveys with staff to see what their experience has been. So what we're saying on the tin, are we delivering it? Is it felt? Is it there? The results of that could be better, you know, so there's work we need to do across that. And the reason we done that wasn't necessarily because of the survey, but what we found was when we was looking at our turnover data, people were leaving with about a year's length of service with us. So we were onboarding people when they were going, and there was a reason for that. So, you know, we're forever doing a bit of a deep dive, I guess, into areas where we suspect something isn't quite right, but we don't know what it is. And we've got the fortunate element of having Business Change help us with some of that, because some of that research does take a little bit of time to really understand what's going on. So it wasn't a question, but I just wanted to share with you, I do recognise what you were saying there. And part of our employee value proposition, so that kind of appendix that you saw at the back, which is the diamond or hexagon shape, I think it is. We tested that in the survey, so I didn't go through that today, but that was another area where we said, do we do these things? Because before we put that out as an attraction model, we want to know that the people internally feel that we are doing that. And again, all of that was really, really supported within the survey with high acknowledgement that they felt we was doing that as an organisation, apart from pay. Which we knew about. So we're looking at changing the language from that, because we don't want to go out to say that we're an amazing employee in terms of our pay if at the moment that doesn't apply to everybody. So, you know, we have taken some reflection on what we're putting out there as our attraction strategy. Your impact report and statement point is marvellous, really great. I don't think we do it enough. I think we do it in pockets, maybe on a small scale within a team to demonstrate the achievement that team's made. But I think that would be really powerful in terms of the connectivity to why I work at Medway and what Medway is achieving. In my previous life, I worked for the Department of Work and Pensions, and when we were hot on the fraudulent activity of claiming benefits, we would often use the savings of what we had found to say that that will put X amount of ambulances on the road this time, and this will fund X amount of police officers. And we found that to be the most powerful thing, actually. So, you know, there's definitely something in that we can take away and think about building that into the communication strategy, because that's not as big as it needs to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to give 4 bite-sized chunks. I'm not expecting a response to any of these necessarily, unless you disagree with what I'm going to say, because time's obviously getting on. But as Councillor MacDonald said, we haven't had the chance to discuss this in our group, so these will be personal observations based on life experience and my trades union experience. And following on from what Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Joy have said, I think it's laudable what's being done on life-work balance and looking at emails on a Sunday and that sort of thing. To me personally, this highlights the usefulness of hybrid working, which you've also flagged. I'm thinking particularly in terms of social isolation. For some groups of workers, I think this works better, provided it's by agreement, so that at least some time is spent in the office with other team members and to be counselled by line managers, etc. Then you mentioned the change, the officers mentioned the change in the whistleblowing policy name, and I see where you're coming from. I'm generally sceptical, though, about changing the name of policies. At my old workplace, they wanted to change the name of the stress policy to the resilience policy. Now, to me, that just signals, I don't know what Medway calls it, having made that comment, but to me, that just signals pull your socks up and be a bit tougher, a resilience policy, rather than calling it a stress policy. But I do see where you're coming from in terms of changing the name of the whistleblowing policy. On the mental health at work, I've no doubt that you've already thought of the value of the work done by the disability charities and the resource they provide. Mind provides a wealth of information on mental health at work and dealing with such issues. I just wanted to comment finally, the 4th point is in terms of people who have always worked in this way, you made that comment, I hope I'm not misquoting the officer, in the context of bullying and discrimination and perhaps being inadvertent bullying to a degree because they'd always worked in this way or were always talked to people in this way. Well, what I'm really driving at is surely we should be looking at this as well from the other end of the telescope. Our recruitment practices, getting a diverse workforce in the first place, and making sure that people are promoted through. It's not satisfactory to have a workforce which is diverse only at the junior levels. You were talking earlier about people getting promoted and the responses to the staff survey in terms of people wanting to progress. And that progression must also be of all diverse groups through the organisation so that you haven't got a lot of middle managers that are just of one type of background. So those were my 4 quick points. I hope you'll take them in the spirit that they're intended.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I won't take every point, but just on the final point, yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right in terms of diversity across the whole of the organisation. We've been working with public health, with their business analysts and their data scientists on a lot of our data. So, you know, statutorily, we have to publish our gender pay gap, for example, but we've run that across our ethnicity and disability, and we've looked at the different layers and what could be creating some of the difficulties we've got. And this all features back into the work we've got to do around inclusivity and equality across the organisation. situation. We definitely have imbalance. There's definitely stuff we need to do. We've started some of that. We're starting at quite a low level, if I'm being absolutely honest with you. And in terms of declaration rates within the system, people having that trust to tell us about their characteristics is something we're trying to build on. And there's things that we've started to put into place which probably should have been in place for a long time, but having diverse panels. You know, we haven't mandated that. We've been naturally nudging at it, but through sheer nature of who's available, or for people who can only sit on those panels at a certain level, sometimes that's really difficult to achieve, and it's something we have discussed in a number of areas across Medway as to how we avoid that in future. So it's on our list. We've got to get better at it, and it's something we've got to do more of. So yeah, but most definitely progression for all, succession for all, and a diverse workforce is something we're focusing on.
Thank you. I don't have another member. Oh, Councillor Maritime.
I've got a question. Firstly, really good presentation. Thank you for that, Sam. And I'd like to say, and I'm sure it goes for every councillor in this room, that, you know, I really value the work done by everybody who works for Medway Council. What is quite concerning from those statistics is the number of people that are wanting to leave within a period of time. I mean, I know from anecdotally from talking to somebody recently, entirely separate thing, but apparently within the last year, 40,000 people have left the teaching profession and are not coming back. They're not going on to a different job. They've just decided, that's it, I've had enough. Now, they're able to backfill some of these positions by people who are currently going through training, but not enough to fill those 40,000 slots. So one of the questions I've got is, as various other people have mentioned about hybrid working, I think hybrid working could be really good. I personally do that in my current day job, and quite like being able to, you know, do a mixture of, you know, being able to do my work from home and break off for an hour and clean my kitchen or whatever it happens to be. But I think it's quite important as well for people to be able to mix with the people that they work with, and I think that's really good for people's mental health. And certainly that's been something that's been quite good as a councillor, to be able to go into our group room that we've now got on the 5th floor, and I can sit there and do some work rather than working from home and see other colleagues. But what assessment's been done in regards to, bear in mind the court now has got half of the building, what assessments have been done in regards to the floor space that's left, in regards to if people want to have a permanent desk when they come in and it might not be occupied for most of the week, or there might be hot desking or whatever else. And I think you make another separate to that is a tangential point, which is one of the things you talked about in the report was about people literally getting a hello from a senior manager walking through their floor. I found quite early on, because I was totally at sea not knowing where anything is, I went to the fostering training one evening, talked to one of your colleagues who said, we're trying to promote this. I said, I'll come and get a poster off you. Now, I had no idea that fostering was based down there. So I assumed it was in here. So I walked round and round and round one Friday afternoon, the 4th floor, not knowing where it was, asking various groups of people who themselves didn't know where fostering was. And I said to a couple of groups, would it help if you had a map put on the wall? And they turned around to me and said, what a really good idea. Yeah, that would be really helpful. Do you know what? Nobody's ever asked us stuff like that. And I then ended up going and having a chat to another 2 senior officers who gave me a different thing related to adult fostering. And one of these people, I had a nice chat with them, off I wandered. A couple of days later, I happened to talk to somebody who's a friend of mine, who it turns out their parent was one of these 2 people who I spoke to, who turned around and said to me, oh, we spoke to this tall northern bloke the other day who we think is who might be one of your mates. I worked out it was me. And their comment was, they'd never really, with 1 or 2 exceptions, ever seen a councillor walking round and chatting to people and just asking how they were. So, I mean, that isn't a question. That's just a little bit of sort of tangential information tying in with what you were saying about people literally just asking how people are and saying hello. But I'd be really interested to if you've done any assessment, like I say, about desk space.
Yeah, thank you. Before we came to the point where we were determining what desk space we needed, and before the courts were making any commitment with us, that kind of model of the 4 hybrid working ways was what kind of gave us our footprint, really, to know what kind of positioning we might need in the building. And each service manager was tasked with thinking about the business need, the individual need, because some people couldn't work at home, as I mentioned before, people living at home with parents, and what foot space they might need. Now, each area has I suppose each team has a designated area. It's not ring fenced off, but there's enough seats that we've done that initial assessment against. Now, part of that was also part of Phoenix that I mentioned, was to check that. So once everybody started to come back in and what that looked like, was that enough or did we need to shift some? We've looked at occupancy rates. So over a period of months, we had people walking around the building physically counting how many people are in, because you couldn't always tell from the badges if people were holding up doors or tailgating in, and taking a visual representation of where places were populated. And most definitely on a Friday, it was the ghost town that I mentioned earlier. Car parks empty, nobody in the building. Tuesday to Thursday, very busy. But what we've done with all of the zones we've got is we've got drop-down zones, which are not, they don't belong to anybody. So there's cohorts of desks that are just free desks for anybody to come and use. They're never at full capacity. There's always, you can always get a desk on that. The other thing that we do across a number of other councils is shared space. So we have a number of desks, which means other councils can come and use ours and we can use theirs. So if you were close to Maidstone and you didn't want to work at home but you want to come over to Medway because Bluebell Hill might be a crash or something, then you could go into Maidstone and work. So we've tried to open up other possibilities outside of this office for other people to go in and socialise and work with people. It's going to be an ongoing dialogue, I think. As I mentioned, in September it was very empty in here. It's quite busy at the moment and people are starting to comment on a little bit of pressure on certain days. I do think there's something around not everybody deciding to work at home on a Friday and having purpose to come in on a Friday. You know, I worked in Cabinet Office before in Government Digital Services, and because of the nature of where the market was, Mondays and Fridays there was nobody around because people literally came down to London Tuesday to Thursday. So I think every organisation grapples with that notion of people having long weekends or taking the pressure out of it. But we have spoke to managers around managing teams, expectations and space. And Business Change kind of own this project of the building capacity along with our facilities people. And that ongoing measure is always there. Now, further work will happen around Broadside and whether we move Broadside into Gunwharf and what that means in terms of that. So almost phase 2 of that project now is looking at capacity with that influx of more people and what that might be. Now, again, we've discussed different working ways, even down to the pressures within the car park. Do we need a drop-down zone where people can come for 20 minutes because they've got to come in and get a piece of equipment and go, rather than try and phone parking and walk 30 minutes down the road, for example? So there's a lot of things on the table depending on that capacity, but it is absolutely something that is up for grabs. We've always been in a situation where we've mapped out other buildings so that if this place became over full here, we do have a lot of buildings across Medway that we can utilise and move into should we need to. And I think at the moment we have an okay balance, but it's not something we could take our eyes off, most definitely. So yeah, initial assessment, absolute review and interrogation of whether that was working, and phase 2 will be now that it's increased, as well as then perhaps some additional resource coming in. But it's an ongoing consideration, yeah. We haven't contractually put anybody as a home worker. So that means anybody can come into this office 5 days a week and expect a desk. And that's our promise to them. So we've got to be mindful of that. And at the moment, patterns are working, but that could change. One of the things we're mindful of is winter approaching. When you're at home, cost of living, you've got to put the lights on, you've got to heat your home. That might see more people come into this office. So we do have a bit of a, I suppose, not a risk register, but a scenario planner of what could drive some of those behaviours. And we've got to keep an eye on it and respond quickly if that happens.
Thank you, Sam. Before I come to you, Vice Chair, just a quick one. How do you evaluate productivity between the two groups, those working from home and those who are based in the office? Is there a difference?
Very good question, Chair, and I think you got me last year on this one as well. Productivity is so difficult to measure in its truest form because of the sheer nature of our work. I mean, within services, there's certain systems that will measure productivity for us. So legal use a system called ICANN, for example, and that almost captures everything that happens because part of that shared service, they need to account for what they're doing with Gratian Borough Council and Medway, and depending on where the people are, you're looking at the productivity across the piece. So in some some service areas it's more sophisticated and they can absolutely measure that productivity and in terms of how someone else is working. In other areas it's not so sophisticated and it's down to engagement, conversations, setting tasks and making sure there's consistency on what people are delivering. I think our new approach to MedPay and how we've structured a band, so we've got an entry level, a good level if you like, and a more experienced senior level. I think that's going to set different expectations because what we've got at the moment is very large bands and we're expecting everybody just to work within that band. So I think by setting out what's expected at different layers within that band that's associated with pay, we'll just make it a little bit tighter to measure. But we don't have a system that would do that. And we're not in a position whereby, you know, we know, for example, if somebody needs to be logged on all day working at a PC, we could check if they've been logged on. We don't want to go down that. It's about trust. You know, I mentioned earlier that this real need to build trust. So it is about managers having that engagement with staff and knowing what they're producing and those regular check-ins. I think, you know, if I'm being absolutely honest with this committee, could we manage poor performance better? Yes. And the answer to that is not always bringing everybody in so you can see them and see what they're doing. So I think we do need to get better at that. And as part of our management training, we are looking at some of those modules that will help managers work in this new way of working, which they probably haven't done before. Because I think we're still in a little bit, not everywhere across Medway, but most definitely in pockets, still that culture of, well, if it's not working, just get them back in, because that's the solution. And that's not always the solution. So better in some areas, but not in others. But I couldn't sit here and give you any figures around productivity for the whole of the council. We just don't have anything sophisticated enough.
Thank you. I mean, is there something you think you could incorporate into your plan going forward? How do we measure it? Because I think it's something we need to answer as an organization. We need to be confident in the difference, and because you can only drive improvement if you're analyzing and measuring this. Yeah, so again, services are analysing and measuring performance that's happening in teams. You know, so if I take my own team, for example, I will know at any given time what cases I've got live, how long and the length of those cases, if I've got an investigation happening, the length of that investigation, and I've got expectations around how things move and the timelines in which we need to apply, and that's backed up by policies. So, you know, every team will have a set of standards and a set of measures they would expect that team to adhere to and be able to deliver against. But the diverse nature of our organisation means it's very different everywhere. So even in children, you've seen in some of the performance data in terms of placements and how long people are in placements. You've seen in housing how long people are in temporary accommodation and the mechanism of moving them through. So I wouldn't like to talk on behalf of every service manager, but every service manager has a service plan, and that service looks at what they're set out to deliver and how they're going to do it. There is a golden thread, if you like, from our corporate plan, and that comes through. And from that service plan, that's how they set the objectives, and the objectives are the measurable parts that are put upon individuals to see what they're doing, and they are measurable. So they will say what's expected within what time frames, and it might be volumes, it might be times, it depends what they're measuring. And that is a one-to-one conversation that constantly happens between a line manager and an individual, and most definitely from the slides we've seen tonight, we're confident that's happening in the bulk of the organisation. There's always going to be room for improvement. So I wouldn't like to say we don't measure performance and we don't measure individual contribution to that overall performance or their personal performance, because that definitely does happen. What I don't have is a whole suite that I could give you now to say this is everything we do. So I suppose food for thought moving forward, particularly with the new framework we're going to look at. Could we get better at it, more consistency in it? Probably we can, yeah, so we could take that away and look at it. Thanks, sir. I have no other member. I'll come to the Vice Chair.
The committee notes the contents of this report, 10.1, on pages 123 to 140. I move that, but further to that, also, as was expressed earlier, that we get a update in June or July of 2024 on the progress of the report. So I move the committee notes the contents of this report, and I move it.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. Is that agreed? Sorry, Councillor McDowell.
Yeah, it was correct. It's before the next survey in May. So not, you know, I know we're going to get an update in July 2024, but it was about getting some form of update before you do the next survey. Thanks, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 10, the work program. Steve Dickens to introduce the report. Sorry, hold on, Steve. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick things from us. The first from myself. For members to know, in the work programme, as you've heard earlier, there is a proposal that housing move to the Regeneration, Culture and Environment Committee. So those items on the work programme relating to housing will fall if that proposal is agreed at Council next week. And then I think Wayne wants to update about task groups.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Just point members to section 5 of the report. We've given you an update on task group topics. So the three current topics actually date back to 2019, and those assessments were carried out for this equivalent meeting back in 2019. So it does seem rather appropriate that we revisit task group topics. We've put together a proposal in 5.6 and also at recommendation 8.1c that we ask each of the ONS committees, including this one, to look at coming up with, say, no more than two topics. And we have a meeting of chairpersons, vice chairpersons and opposition spokespersons to come up with a priority list, which would then come back to this committee for kind of final decision. So we have basically like a list of 4 topics to get us going on. We're not looking for any topics from yourselves tonight. We would want to do it at the next committee meeting, but we're really looking for your permission to go out to the all 4 ONS committees to just look at, you know, what do we want to have a look at now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member? Vice Chair.
I move the recommendations on page 145, 8.1a. Oh.
Sorry, Chair. It was a comment on the work programme, but we can go to recommendations. That's fine. Don't worry. It's okay. Don't worry.
I move the recommendations on page 145 about the work programme 8.1a. Members agree the committee's provisional work programme at Appendix 1. B. Note the work programme of the other overview and scrutiny committees, Appendix 2, and C. Request that each overview and scrutiny committee recommends no more than 2 topics for future task groups to be considered at a meeting of the overview and scrutiny committee chairpersons, vice chairperson and opposition spokesperson, where a short list of 4 topics and their priority order will be recommended to this committee for a final decision. I move this proposal.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. This brings us to the end of our first Business Support Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But before we leave, I just want to say thanks to officers, our Chief Financial Officer, Katie Durkee, our Chief Organization and Culture Officer, Sam Beck-McFarley, Chloe in IT, our Democratic Services Officer, Steve Dickens and Wayne, and members of the public, I've said the leader and the deputy leader observing us, and cabinet member observing tonight, and the general public working from home. I want to thank you for enduring 3 hours of scrutiny. Thank you.